Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I had never seen anyone sit in my living room without permission before. The night I noticed that hooded figure, I felt my heart slam against my chest. My eyes stung from a restless sleep, and I thought I was dreaming. That thing was just there, on my armchair, not moving, not making a sound. I blinked hard, and it disappeared. I'm used to falling asleep on my couch with the TV on. Sometimes I wake up disoriented, but I always know my apartment. That night, I felt like I didn't. Nothing felt normal anymore. I remember the time on my phone was close to midnight. I drifted in and out of sleep during a boring documentary. The couch cushions felt lumpy beneath me. My neck was stiff. The room had that stale odor of microwaved dinner and old socks. I glanced around, hoping to catch a glimpse of the time on the cable box. And that's when I saw it. A person, or something shaped like a person, wearing a hooded cloak. It sat upright in my old green armchair, the one I'd found at a yard sale. I couldn't see its face. I only saw the outline of its head and shoulders. At first, I felt confused. My vision was fuzzy, and I thought, is this a trick of the light? My heart rate quickened. My mouth went dry. I rubbed my eyes and leaned forward, trying to focus. My breathing became shallow, and my fingertips felt cold. I wanted to speak, but I couldn't get a word out. It felt like my tongue was glued to the roof of my mouth. I blinked once and the figure vanished. There was no gradual fade. It was just there 1 second and gone the next. I sat up straight, scanning the room. The lamp on the side table was on. The TV was still on too. Nothing else seemed different. I got up, walked over to the armchair and ran my hand along the seat. It felt normal. The cushion had the same worn fabric. It was slightly warm, but that might have been my imagination. I stood there, feeling my pulse throb in my neck. The apartment was quiet, except for the faint TV chatter. I decided I was too tired and half awake to trust my senses. I turned off the TV and marched to my bedroom. I shut the door, flicked on the ceiling light, and tried to calm down. My legs felt weak, and my knees shook a bit. My head ached, and I rubbed my temples. After a few minutes, I convinced myself it was a hallucination. I changed into an old t-shirt and shorts, crawled into bed, and tried to sleep. A few hours later, I opened my eyes. My room was dark except for a glow coming from the street lamp outside. My blinds were partially open. I could see the silhouette of a figure standing in front of the window. It was the same hooded shape, tall and unmoving. My stomach tightened. I froze in place, my body going rigid. I thought, this can't be real. This is another dream. But I was awake. My sheets felt damp from my sweat. My breath sounded harsh in my ears. I reached for the lamp on the nightstand, fumbling with the switch. I kept my eyes on the figure the whole time. As soon as the light turned on, it vanished. The spot near the window was empty. The blinds rattled slightly, but that could have been the air conditioner kicking in. My heart hammered, and my throat felt tight. I got out of bed, walked toward the window, and pulled the blinds closed. My hands were shaking. The back of my neck tingled. I slept with the lights on after that. I kept one lamp on in the bedroom and another in the hallway. It still didn't help much. Every time I drifted off, I jolted awake at the slightest sound. Usually it was just the hum of the fridge or the creak of the floorboards. But each time I heard anything, my eyes popped open, and I'd check the corners of the room. The rest of that night was miserable. I ended up pacing the hallway around 5 in the morning, too uneasy to go back to bed. The next day I tried to keep busy. I went out, walked around the block, and grabbed coffee. I made an effort to stay in crowded places like the diner down the street. I wanted to avoid being alone with my thoughts. I kept remembering that hooded figure, the image replayed in my head, that silhouette, that stillness. I even felt it in my body, like a leftover tremor in my hands and shoulders. By evening, I felt drained and on edge. I debated whether I should go to a friend's place or get a motel room, but I didn't want to run away from my own home. I got back to my apartment around 7, ordered pizza, and forced myself to eat. Each bite felt tasteless. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the door to the living room, expecting something to pop out. Nothing did. I ended up on the couch again, but this time I left every light on. The overhead fixture in the living room, the standing lamp near the TV, the kitchen light, and the hallway light. Everything. My place felt bright and artificial. The TV volume was low. I tried to watch a show, but I kept glancing around. There was a tension in the air, like the room was holding its breath. Sometime around midnight, I started to nod off again. My head jerked forward a few times. I tried to stay awake, but my eyelids were heavy. Then I felt a strange pressure in the room, like the air got thicker. I looked to my left, toward the corner where my old bookshelf stands. The figure was there. It was just standing with its back against the wall, hood up, face obscured. My skin prickled with cold sweat. I felt a surge of adrenaline, and my hands balled into fists. I couldn't see any eyes or features, just darkness beneath that hood. It didn't move. I started to get up, my muscles tense, ready to run or do something, but my legs felt like lead. My mind raced. I thought about turning off the lights or turning them on. Then I remembered they were all already on. I thought about yelling, but my voice caught in my throat. Instead, I tried to take a step toward it, hoping to show I wasn't afraid. But as soon as I lifted my foot, the figure disappeared. It vanished in an instant, like it had never been there. I spent the rest of that night walking around my apartment, checking every closet and corner. I opened cabinets, moved furniture, and even checked inside the kitchen drawers. I knew it was stupid, but I had to do something. My reflection in the bathroom mirror looked worn out. My eyes were bloodshot, and the stubble on my jaw looked scruffy. I splashed cold water on my face and tried to steady my breathing. I felt silly, but also terrified. For the next few days, I had trouble functioning. I went to work, but I kept messing up simple tasks. I spilled coffee on my desk, forgot my computer password, and nearly walked into a glass door. My boss asked if I was okay. I lied and said I wasn't sleeping well because of a neighbor's dog barking at night. She gave me a concerned look, but I just shrugged it off. I didn't want to explain the hooded figure. It sounded insane, even to me. At home, I kept every light on until I went to bed, but that only helped a little. The figure appeared in random spots. Sometimes I'd see it near the window. Other times, it stood next to the bookshelf or near the hallway door. Once, I caught it in the bathroom mirror behind me. I spun around ready to confront it, and the space was empty. My body felt stiff for hours after that. My fingers tingled and wouldn't stop shaking. Every appearance felt the same. The figure never spoke, never moved toward me. It just stood there watching. I couldn't see any expression or hear any voice. I got into the habit of taking deep breaths to calm down whenever I spotted it. My muscles would tighten, and my lungs would feel restricted. Then I'd blink or take a step, and it would vanish. I started sleeping in short bursts. Sometimes I'd pass out for an hour, then wake up drenched in sweat. My head pounded from the lack of rest. I felt paranoid all the time. I'd hear a creak or a pop in the walls, and I'd jump. My back was constantly tense, and I walked around with hunched shoulders. One afternoon, I left work early and headed straight to a hardware store. I bought extra locks for my doors and windows. I spent a couple of hours installing them, even though my windows are on the second floor, and it's unlikely anyone would climb up. I also grabbed a few motion-activated nightlights. I placed them in the living room, hallway, and bedroom. Then I tested them by walking around. They lit up when I moved, but that didn't give me much peace. I remembered the figure showing up in bright light, so it wasn't really about darkness. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe I was dealing with exhaustion or stress, and it was triggering some kind of hallucination. Or maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me in low light. But it wasn't always low light. Also, I had never experienced anything like this before. I thought about going to a doctor, but I didn't have the energy to schedule an appointment. I felt stuck in a cycle of fear and denial. A few nights later, I heard a soft tapping sound near my bedroom window. It was around 1 in the morning and I was lying in bed, half awake. My entire body stiffened. The sound was like a faint knock, but inconsistent. I sat up, turned on my lamp, and stared at the curtains. The tapping continued for a few seconds, then stopped. I swung my legs out of bed and stood up, feeling my calf muscles tense and cramp. I pulled the curtains aside, and there was nothing but the street below. No figure, no branches scraping the glass. Nothing. I tried to convince myself the building was just settling or that the pipes were making random noises. My scalp felt prickly and I kept blinking. My reflection in the glass looked pale. Then I heard another thump in the living room. It sounded like a shoe hitting the floor. I must have jumped a foot in the air. I forced myself to move down the hallway, step by step, with my hands clenched. The place was fully lit, every lamp on. When I reached the living room, I froze. The figure stood by the couch facing me. It was about 6 feet tall with that hood pulled forward. I could almost make out something under the hood, but the darkness was too strong. My lips parted and I let out a shaky breath. My heart pounded so loudly it hurt my ears. I took another step and the floor creaked. The figure stayed there. I felt a sudden wave of nausea, and my vision blurred at the edges. I wanted to speak. I wanted to say, "What do you want?" My mouth moved, but no sound came out at first. My throat felt closed. After a few seconds, I managed to whisper, "Hey." The figure vanished. It was like someone had flipped a switch. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone. I yelled in frustration, throwing my head back. My voice sounded raw in the emptiness of my living room. My hands trembled and my stomach churned. I started pacing, shouting things like, "Leave me alone," and "I can't take this anymore." My voice echoed off the walls. After a while, I sank onto the couch, my arms resting on my knees, trying to catch my breath. That was a turning point for me. I grabbed a notebook and started writing down the times and places where the figure appeared. Over the next week, I kept track of each sighting. It always showed up between midnight and 3 in the morning. It appeared in several locations: the armchair, the window, the bookshelf, the bathroom mirror, and next to the couch. It never made a sound. It never approached me. It never left any physical trace, like footprints or items out of place. With this record, I tried to see if there was a pattern. Sometimes it would show up 2 nights in a row, then skip a night. Sometimes it would appear once, other times twice in the same night. The unpredictability made me uneasy. My nerves were shot. Even though it never tried to hurt me, its presence felt oppressive. I didn't want to live like that anymore. One evening, I decided to stay awake all night on purpose. I made coffee, energy drinks, and snacks. I put on music, kept the lights on, and watched the clock. Midnight came. Nothing happened. 1 in the morning. Nothing. 2. Nothing. I felt my eyelids drooping, my head nodding forward, so I forced myself to walk laps around the room. The place was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I reached 3 in the morning without seeing anything. When 4 came around, I collapsed on the couch, exhausted but also relieved. I thought maybe I had broken the cycle. I turned off a few lights and tried to rest. I must have dozed off because I opened my eyes to see the figure standing across the room, near the bookshelf. My clock said it was almost 5. My mouth went dry, and I felt my pulse hammering again. The figure was as still as ever. I glared at it, gripping the couch cushion with both hands. I didn't move or speak. My body shook from exhaustion and fear. Then, just like before, it vanished. No slow disappearance, no footsteps. I stayed on the couch until morning light crept in through the windows. I was too tired to do much else. That's where I am now. I haven't found a solution. The figure still shows up, mostly at night. It doesn't say anything or leave any signs. I keep my notes. I try to maintain a routine. I look for help online, but most stories I read are different from mine. People talk about nightmares or actual intruders. This thing is neither. It's like a silent shadow that feels real and unreal at the same time. I try not to label it. All I know is that I see it. I hear the noises. I feel my hair stand on end and my muscles tighten. Sometimes it leaves me alone for a day or two. Then I let my guard down and it comes back. I haven't told anyone else. My friends would think I'm making it up or they'd worry I was losing my mind. Maybe I am. I can't decide. But it's real to me. When I look at it, I feel real fear. I feel my heart thumping, sweat gathering on my forehead, breath catching in my chest. This is my life now, balancing between exhaustion and dread. When I try to sleep, I expect to see that hooded silhouette in the corner of my eye. Even when I don't see it, I'm waiting for it to appear. That's the story. I'm a grown man who can't sit in his own living room without every light on. I jump at small noises, and I question my sanity every night. But I still live here, with this silent presence in the shadows. I'm not ready to move out, and I'm not ready to tell anyone face to face. So I wait, and I watch, and I keep hoping it will vanish for good. So far, that hasn't happened. It just keeps showing up, standing there, watching me in silence. That's all there is. I set everything up in my basement because I thought it would be fun. I had the idea after I spotted an old projector at a garage sale. It looked scratched and stained, but it still turned on. I felt an immediate urge to buy it. I didn't think about anything else. I just paid the guy and carried the projector home. I liked the idea of having a small private theater where I could watch movies the way people did decades ago. The idea felt straightforward. But from the very first night, something seemed off. I found a few reels of film in a battered box at a flea market a week later. The labels were faded. I didn't recognize the movie names, but one of them caught my eye because it had no label at all. It was a plain black reel with no markings. I was curious, so I took it home. The other reels were nothing special. Old westerns, cheap horror flicks, and some weird foreign films. But that unlabeled reel felt different in my hands. I noticed small scratches on the plastic. The tape looked worn in places. I thought it might be something lost or forgotten, maybe a rare short film. I wanted to see what was on it. The first night I tried it, I turned off all the lights in the basement. I placed the reel on the projector's spindle, threaded it, and turned it on. The projector made a low rumble, then started clicking as the film rolled. At first, it was an old black and white silent movie. It seemed to show a small town, maybe from the 1930s or 1940s. I saw people in hats and old cars driving on narrow streets. The footage was grainy, but I could still make out the buildings and the people's faces. They looked normal, just walking around or talking to each other. I thought it was a lost documentary. Then, out of nowhere, the image jumped. The town scene flickered and turned into a dark hallway. It looked cramped with peeling wallpaper and a single light bulb swinging from the ceiling. I couldn't hear anything, but the projector's sound changed pitch for a moment. My heart started thumping. I leaned forward. I thought maybe it was a glitch in the reel, like it had been taped over. The hallway stayed on screen for maybe 6 or 7 seconds, then cut back to the town footage. Nothing else happened that night, so I didn't think much of it. I just found it odd. I watched the rest of the reel, and it went back to normal scenes of that small town. The film ended with no credits, just a black screen. I turned on the lights, felt a chill on the back of my neck, and decided to call it a night. The next evening, I went down to the basement again. I still had that hallway footage in my mind. I wanted to see if I'd imagined it. So I started the projector with the same reel. This time, the film repeated some of the town scenes, but there were extra moments that hadn't been there before. I noticed a quick shot of what looked like a figure turning a corner in that same hallway. It happened so fast, maybe less than a second. The figure looked tall, almost gaunt, but it moved with surprising speed. Then the scene vanished, and the normal footage came back. I shivered. I kept looking at the projector, wondering if something was wrong with the mechanism. I rewound the film and tried to find that snippet. It wasn't there anymore. The frames showed the normal scene of the town, just some people walking around. No hallway, no figure. I felt a spike of confusion and a weird wave of panic. My mouth went dry. My palms were damp. I shut off the projector and sat in the basement for a while staring at the blank wall. I tried to explain it to myself. Maybe I had nodded off for a second. Maybe there was a glitch. But the memory was too clear, and my heart was still beating fast. On the third night, I decided to check the reel more carefully. I had a small work light, so I pulled out the reel and examined the frames with a magnifying glass. I saw normal images of the town in most frames, but every so often I found a frame that didn't match. One frame had a blurred shot of a corridor. Another had some kind of smudge that looked like a symbol on a wall. I couldn't tell what it meant, but it looked like a circular shape with lines inside it. My stomach twisted. It reminded me of something I might see in an abandoned building. When I projected the film again, the random scenes got longer. I saw more of that hallway. The wallpaper was stained in spots, and some parts of the wall had these symbols scrawled in dark paint, or maybe charcoal. There was also a flash of a different room. The camera turned slowly, showing a corner with a single chair. No one was sitting in it. Then it cut to the tall figure standing at the end of a hallway. The figure's face was turned away, so I couldn't see any features. It stood motionless, but I sensed it was aware of me somehow. I felt my chest tighten. My breath got shallow. I rubbed my arms, trying to steady myself. The figure vanished, and the normal town footage came back. Over the next few nights, the film changed more drastically. Each time, the strange inserts lasted longer. I started noticing new details, like broken doors and old furniture in those dark rooms. My basement always felt colder when I was watching. Sometimes I caught myself holding my breath, waiting for the next shift in the footage. I kept expecting the film to run out, but it never did. It looped in ways I couldn't explain. I tried to watch the reel all the way through, but it seemed endless. The projector never jammed, never overheated. It just played. I tried to show these scenes to a friend. I invited a buddy over and told him I found some weird lost film. He sat next to me, but all he saw was the regular black and white movie about the small town. I waited for the hallway. I waited for the figure. Nothing showed up. I felt like an idiot. He told me it looked boring, and after a few minutes he went upstairs. The second he left, I saw the hallway flash on the screen again. My head jerked around, but my friend was gone. I rewound it to prove I wasn't losing my mind, but the scene disappeared again. I started feeling edgy about going down there alone, but I couldn't stop. Something pushed me to keep watching. I felt drawn to the reel like it had a hold on me. Sometimes I heard my own heartbeat echo in the silent basement. Other times I heard faint scratching sounds coming from the walls, but I never found the source. I tried turning off the projector mid-film once, thinking maybe that would break the pattern. But the reel kept spinning for a few seconds, like it had a momentum of its own. When it finally stopped, I heard a faint whisper. It almost sounded like a breath near my ear. I felt the hairs on my neck stand up, and I rushed upstairs without even unthreading the film. I closed the basement door and leaned against it, breathing hard. 2 nights later, I forced myself to go back. I couldn't sleep. I was too curious, or maybe too stubborn. I turned the projector on again. The film started like usual, with the townspeople walking around. Then it switched to the dark hallway. This time the shot lasted a full minute. I saw the corridor's walls more clearly. Someone had drawn those strange symbols in thick, dark strokes. Some symbols were scratched into the plaster. Others were painted. I heard a faint humming sound from the projector. The film showed the figure again. It stood farther down the corridor, half hidden by shadow. Its head turned, and I saw a flash of pale skin on its face. I felt a surge of adrenaline. My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. I wanted to shut the projector off, but I couldn't move. The figure walked closer. The camera angle changed, as if it were moving along the corridor toward me. The figure's eyes were hidden behind shadow. I heard my breath shaking. My legs trembled. I gripped the edge of the table. The figure stopped, its head tilted like it was scanning the room. Then the film cut to the normal footage again, showing a busy street in the old town. I exhaled, only then realizing I'd been holding my breath. I noticed after that night that my basement started smelling musty. There was a damp spot on one wall. I tried to ignore it, but it bothered me. It reminded me of those dark corridors in the film. The next time I watched, the figure appeared more frequently. It looked thinner, and I thought I saw it reaching for the camera. When I saw its arms stretch out, my stomach tightened. My heartbeat felt erratic. I tried to back away from the projector, but the reel kept rolling. I turned around to see if anyone was behind me, but the basement was empty. I could only hear the whir of the projector and my own strained breathing. Around the 10th or 11th viewing, the film's entire structure changed. The normal town scenes barely showed up anymore. I watched shot after shot of different corridors, some with flickering lights, others pitch black except for a small window. Sometimes I could almost smell the dampness and rust, as if the film was leaking into reality. The figure started showing up in nearly every scene. It never spoke. I never heard a voice, but I felt a pressure on my chest every time it appeared. My hands would shake. My throat got tight. It felt like something was gripping my heart. One night I focused on the figure's face as much as I could. I wanted to see if it had eyes or a mouth. The projector's beam flickered and I saw the figure's head turn in my direction. I felt certain it was looking at me. The screen lit up its features, but they stayed blurry, like the film refused to show me the details. I thought I saw empty sockets for eyes, but I'm not sure. My head was pounding, and my eyes burned from staring so hard. When the scene ended, I noticed I was sweating. My shirt was damp, my hands felt clammy. After that, I started hearing small noises in the basement even when the projector was off. I'd be upstairs trying to fall asleep, and I'd hear a clicking sound from below. It reminded me of the projector's gears turning, but I knew it was off. Once I even heard what sounded like footsteps on the concrete floor. I grabbed a flashlight and walked downstairs. The basement was dark. Nothing was there, but I felt a cold draft brush across my shoulders. The hair on my arm stood up. I turned on the lights, checked every corner, and found nothing. Then I heard a knock on the door to the projector room. It was soft, almost hesitant. I froze. My nerves spiked. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. The knock came again, the same gentle tap. I moved toward the door, reached for the knob, and paused. My ears started ringing. I opened the door quickly, shining the flashlight inside. The projector sat on the table. The film reel was still in place, but it wasn't moving. No one was there. I felt a tightness in my chest, like I couldn't take a full breath. I shut the door, locked it, and stood there for a while, trying to slow my breathing. A few nights ago, I decided to destroy the film. I took out a pair of scissors and held the reel in my hands, planning to cut it. But I couldn't do it. I felt fear ripple through my body, like my arms got weak. My fingers shook, and I dropped the scissors. Instead, I put the reel back on the projector and watched it again. This time, the figure took up almost the entire screen. It was closer than ever. I felt my pulse hammering. I was afraid to move. Then, for a moment, I swear I saw it tilt its head upward. Its eyes, or whatever was there, seemed to look directly into mine. My vision blurred, and I felt nauseous. I shut the projector off. The film kept rolling for a couple more seconds before finally stopping. I pulled the reel off and threw it on a shelf. I can't bring myself to watch it again. But every time I pass by the basement stairs, I think I hear the projector humming. I've checked the cord and it's always unplugged. I can't explain it. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night covered in sweat, convinced I hear faint footsteps below me. I try to ignore it, but my heart beats so fast I can't sleep. I keep picturing that hallway. I keep seeing the figure in my mind, reaching through the screen. I feel like it's somewhere in my house now, lurking in a corner I haven't checked. I still haven't thrown the reel away. I think about tossing it in the trash or burning it. But part of me is afraid of what might happen if I do. I imagine the figure appearing outside the screen, or maybe behind me while I sleep. I've left the basement lights on for the past few nights. I haven't heard as many noises, but I still feel uneasy. Sometimes I walk to the top of the basement stairs and listen. I hear small clicks and faint static, like the sound of an old film reel spinning. My gut twists. My hands start shaking. I stand there for a few seconds, then retreat to my bedroom and lock the door. I keep the lights on there too. I don't know what else to do. The projector is still down there. The reel is still on the shelf. When I close my eyes, I see that figure. It's burned into my memory. I'm scared to watch the reel again because I don't want to see what's next. I don't want to see how close it can come to noticing me. But I feel like it's already noticed me. I feel like it's waiting for me to sit down and turn the projector on again, so it can move one step further out of that hallway and into my basement. I wish I'd never bought this damn thing. But it's too late for that now. And I can't shake the feeling that the reel isn't finished showing me whatever it wants me to see. I arrived at the cabin around midday, tired from the drive but excited to fish in the nearby streams. The road had been rough, full of loose gravel and sudden turns, and I had felt every bump along the way. My truck's suspension groaned, and my hands were sore from gripping the wheel so hard. I just wanted to unpack my gear and enjoy some time away from crowded areas. There was a small clearing around the cabin, surrounded by thick pine trees that blocked most of the sunlight. The cabin itself looked old but sturdy, with a simple wooden door and a short set of steps leading to a narrow porch. As I stepped out of my truck, I felt a chill in the air. It wasn't freezing, but there was a definite bite to the breeze. I could smell damp leaves and the faint scent of moss. It felt good to be away from everything else. I hauled my fishing rods, cooler, and supplies inside. The cabin had a single room with a bed, a small table, and a tiny kitchen area along one wall. I saw a propane stove, some cupboards, and a sink attached to a plastic water container. No electricity, but there was a simple gas lantern for light. There was also a wood-burning stove in one corner. I spotted a small pile of split logs next to it. I figured I'd be comfortable enough for a few days if the weather stayed decent. I decided to fish that afternoon. I packed a few items in a backpack, some snacks, a water bottle, an extra jacket, and walked down a narrow trail that ran behind the cabin. It led through some tall pines and descended toward a stream I could hear rushing in the distance. The forest was dense, and every step on the path kicked up little puffs of dust or scattered dried needles. Occasionally, I'd see a glimpse of the sky through the branches. The air smelled fresh, almost sharp, like pine sap and damp earth. I liked it. I took in deep breaths and kept walking. When I reached the stream, I found a spot where large boulders formed a small cascade. The water tumbled over the rocks and settled into a deeper pool downstream. I set up my fishing rod, using a simple spinner lure I'd had luck with in other places. My arms felt relaxed for the first time in weeks. I cast out, reeled in, then repeated the process. The noise of the rushing water was constant, but soothing. After a few minutes, I got a bite, a small trout. I released it, deciding I wanted something bigger for dinner. An hour later, I caught a trout that was a bit over a foot long. That was good enough for me. I cleaned it near the water and kept it in my cooler. The afternoon sun was getting lower, and I had to be careful navigating the trail back. The hike up felt steeper than before, and by the time I got to the cabin, I was sweating under my jacket. The temperature dropped quickly in the mountains, though, so I didn't complain. The cabin looked the same, quiet and untouched. No signs of anyone else. I heard some birds calling in the trees overhead. Their cries echoed off the mountainsides. I opened the cabin door and set my gear inside. Then I grabbed some more wood from the small log pile outside and brought it in for the night. There was a modest pile of kindling already set near the stove, so I appreciated that whoever owned the cabin had prepared well. I cooked the trout in a small cast iron pan on the propane stove. The sizzling sound filled the cabin. I seasoned it with salt and pepper. The smell of fresh fish and cooking oil replaced the musty cabin smell. While it cooked, I set up my sleeping bag on the bed. The mattress was old and lumpy, but I figured it would be good enough for a few nights. After dinner, I cleaned up, washing the pan in the small sink. I dried everything with a towel I had brought. Then I lit the gas lantern and turned off the overhead battery-powered light. Outside, night settled in. The wind started to pick up, and I heard branches scraping against each other. I sat at the small table, flipping through a worn field guide about local fish. The cabin was quiet except for the wind and my occasional cough. The lantern hissed softly. I considered reading a bit before bed, but I felt tired from the day's hike and fishing. I decided to get some sleep. I crawled into my sleeping bag and turned off the lantern. Darkness wrapped everything. I heard the wind blow harder, making the walls creak a little. The trees outside rustled, their branches brushing against the side of the cabin. I tried to ignore it and focus on drifting off. Sometime in the night, I woke up. My heart was pounding, but I didn't know why. I listened for a moment. The wind was still there, but there was another sound. It was like a deep voice calling my name, slow and deliberate. I thought maybe it was a trick of my half-asleep mind, so I held my breath, trying to hear it more clearly. Then I heard it again. It said my name in a low, gravelly tone, like someone clearing their throat but speaking at the same time. It came from somewhere outside, maybe near the trees or the porch. I felt a sudden rush of adrenaline. My hands gripped the edge of the sleeping bag. A numbness spread in my chest. I couldn't see a thing in the pitch black. I reached for the flashlight on the floor next to the bed. I switched it on and aimed it at the windows. The flashlight's beam cut through the darkness, reflecting off the glass. Nothing outside. I jumped out of bed and hurried to each window, shining the light outside. But I didn't see any movement. The trees shifted with the gusts, and the porch was still. I went to the door, made sure it was locked. It felt secure. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe someone was messing with me. Maybe the wind carried voices in a strange way. But I knew what I heard. It wasn't the wind. It said my name. I spent the rest of the night in and out of shallow sleep. Every time I started to drift off, I'd tense up at any noise. My breathing was fast and my chest felt tight. By the time dawn lightened the windows, I felt more exhausted than I did before bed. I decided to get up and check around outside. I wanted to see if there were footprints or some sign that someone had been out there. I put on my jacket and boots, grabbed my flashlight again, then unbolted the door. The morning air was cold and still. No wind. The ground was wet from the overnight moisture. I stepped off the porch, scanning the area for tracks. That's when I saw the footprints. They were big, bigger than any shoe print I've ever seen. The edges were muddied, so I couldn't see details of treads or anything like that. They seemed to be about twice the size of my boot. The pattern was odd. The prints started near the edge of the clearing, but there was no trail leading to them. It was like they just appeared in the mud. They circled the cabin, passing within a few feet of the walls and windows. Then they ended suddenly on the other side of the clearing. No trail leading away. No sign of disturbance in the surrounding brush or trees. It didn't make sense. I crouched down near the first print I saw and pressed my hand into the mud beside it. My hand seemed small next to that indentation. The mud was slightly squishy, which meant the print was fresh. I stood up, feeling uneasy. My gut tightened, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. I tried to see if there were any hair or fur clumps around, thinking maybe it was some kind of bear print, but it didn't look like a bear track. Bears have distinct toes and claws. These tracks had a weird shape, almost like a broad, flat foot. I felt a jolt of fear just looking at them. I walked around the cabin, following the prints. They skirted the porch, passed under one window, and continued around the back. Every time I tried to figure out a direction they came from, I couldn't. There was no path in the brush. There weren't any broken branches or bent plants leading away. The prints just ended. I tried stepping around to see if there was another trail, but I found nothing. I stood there, shifting my weight from one foot to the other. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, even though I saw nothing in the trees. I decided to gather my gear and see if I could do another round of fishing, hoping to clear my head. I set out down the same trail as before. The forest felt different this time. Every little sound made me jerk my head to look. My mind raced, thinking about large creatures or strange people roaming around. I tried to push those thoughts aside and focus on the path. The sun was brighter and the sky was clear. After a while, I reached the stream and set up my fishing rod again. The water was still cold. My breath showed in the air. I cast a few times, but my heart wasn't in it. I kept looking over my shoulder, scanning the tree line for movement. After catching one small fish, I decided to head back. I felt uneasy, like I didn't want to stay away from the cabin for too long. As I climbed the trail, I heard the wind picking up again. The branches swayed, making a shuffling sound above me. When I got back to the clearing, I checked the mud where the tracks had been. They were still there, starting and ending in the same bizarre way. I walked around the area, hoping maybe the morning sun had dried something enough to reveal a path, but no luck. I spent the afternoon around the cabin, chopping some extra wood with the small axe that was left behind by the cabin owners. The physical work helped me stay calm. My muscles ached from the effort, and the repetitive motions kept my mind focused. Now and then, I'd glance at the surrounding trees, expecting movement or some figure standing there. But it was just still. Occasionally the wind would blow, and the tree branches would rock back and forth. As evening approached, I felt dread creeping in. My stomach churned at the thought of hearing that voice again. I built up the fire in the wood stove early. I made a quick dinner of canned soup. The warmth of the stove made the cabin cozy, but I couldn't relax. I kept checking the windows, pressing my ear against the door to see if I heard anything outside. Nothing. By the time darkness fell, the wind had returned stronger than before. I heard it whistle through the trees, then die down, then gust again. Shadows flickered around the cabin as the flames in the stove danced. I decided to sit near the stove instead of lying in bed. I kept the lantern on, not wanting to be in total darkness. The hours seemed to drag by. My eyes felt heavy, but I forced myself to stay alert. Sometime around midnight, I heard a thump outside. It sounded like something fell or was dropped. My heart pounded. I slowly got up and grabbed the flashlight. I crept to the window, parted the curtain, and aimed the beam. I saw nothing but swaying branches and dark shapes. Another gust of wind hit, rattling the cabin door. I stood there for a while, waiting to hear that voice. The only sound was the wind. I stayed up until the early hours, then dozed off in the chair next to the stove. When I woke, sunlight was streaming in through the windows. My back was stiff and my neck ached. I stood up, stretched, and decided to look around outside again. The footprints were still there, same as before. They hadn't changed or multiplied. I scanned the perimeter, stepping carefully around the muddy spots. No new prints, no other signs. I felt a mix of relief and confusion. Whatever had been there hadn't come back, or at least hadn't left more footprints. I spent the rest of that day double-checking the locks, making sure the windows were secure. My thoughts revolved around leaving early. But part of me was stubborn. I had come for a few days of peaceful fishing, and I didn't want to run off just because something freaked me out. Still, I couldn't explain what happened. The voice, those massive prints, and the feeling that they just appeared and disappeared bothered me. I tried to keep my mind on practical tasks. I gathered more firewood, tidied the cabin, and cooked another meal. Yet the tension in my stomach never went away. That night was windy again. I set my sleeping bag on the bed, but I ended up lying awake, listening. I heard the wind outside, branches scraping the walls, but no voice. I forced myself to peek through the window a few times. I used the flashlight to scan the porch. Nothing moved. Finally, exhaustion took over, and I fell into a restless sleep. When morning came, I stepped outside and saw that the footprints had dried into the mud but were starting to crack around the edges. No new prints. I stayed one more day, fishing for a few hours and keeping busy. Nothing else happened during that time. On my last morning, I packed my truck and prepared to leave. I took one final look at those footprints. They still started out of nowhere, circled the cabin, and vanished. It made no sense to me. I felt uneasy, but I couldn't do anything about it. No one else was around to ask for help. I locked up the cabin, tossed my gear in the back of the truck, and drove away. As I headed down the rough road, I couldn't stop thinking about the low voice calling my name in the night and the footprints that shouldn't exist. The whole thing left me tense and jumpy. Even as the trees thinned out and the road merged with the highway, I still felt like something was following me, just out of sight. I don't have an explanation for what happened. All I know is that sometimes out in those mountains you can't ignore the things you can't explain, and when something calls your name in the dark, you remember it for a long time. I noticed something strange the day I moved into the old chalet. My arms felt prickly, and I sensed something brushing against my skin when there was nothing visible around me. I tried to ignore it at first, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that something hung in the air. It wasn't until the next morning that I discovered the nearly invisible threads stretching between the trees. That sight made me pause at the edge of the property. The threads were so thin that I only caught a faint glimmer when sunlight hit them. I stood there, wondering if they were old remnants of a spider's web or some unusual plant growth. I reached out without thinking, and the moment my fingertips made contact, my entire body went cold. It was like a surge of static electricity that ran through my arms and down my spine. My breath caught in my throat, and I yanked my hand back. I didn't see any actual spiders or insects, so I couldn't figure out the source. That alone might have been just a strange curiosity, but it wasn't the last time I felt that shock. I bought this chalet because it was cheap and looked solid enough for a quiet life near the forest. It's a simple place with old wooden floors, a brick fireplace, and windows that creak whenever the wind blows. There's a narrow path out back that leads into the woods. On my first day, I walked that path to clear my head. I spotted only a few threads that morning, but they were definitely there. They hung between low branches and random bushes. I tried pulling one loose with a small twig. It snapped with a faint sound, and I felt that same chill pass through my body, even though I never touched it directly with my hand that time. I dropped the twig right away because my fingers tingled. Over the next few days, I settled into the chalet. I set up my living room with a couch, a small table, and a lamp in the corner. I unpacked my clothes in the single bedroom upstairs, and I placed my kitchen items in old cabinets that smelled a bit musty. Every morning I took a walk outside to see if I could explore more of the forest. On one morning I saw new strands where I hadn't noticed any before. They seemed to appear overnight, strung between trees and bushes that didn't have any such threads the day before. Whenever I got too close, I caught that same electric feeling. It grew stronger each time. Sometimes I felt the hair on my arms rise, even if I didn't touch the threads. I tried not to dwell on it too much at first. I figured maybe there was some natural explanation. I even tried researching local insects on my phone, thinking maybe some rare bug produced these threads. The reception in the chalet wasn't great, though, and I didn't find anything that made sense. I also tried looking for small webs or typical spider patterns, but I didn't see any standard shape. These threads were random and scattered, more like single strands that connected random points. The chill they gave off was the biggest problem. It made me feel drained afterward, like all my warmth was sucked out for a moment. My arms would remain goosebumped for minutes at a time. After about a week, I started noticing threads inside the house. The first one I saw was in the hallway right near the doorway to the living room. It was so faint that I almost walked into it. At the last second, I saw the light catch the strand and I stopped. My heart started pounding, and I felt an immediate sense of dread. I stepped back and grabbed a broom from the corner. I waved the broom in front of me, hoping to brush the strand aside. The moment the broom made contact, I felt that static shock again, but much stronger than before. My arms vibrated and my legs weakened. I staggered backward, dropping the broom. The shock faded quickly, but my hand still shook for a minute or two. I stood there, breathing hard, staring at an almost invisible line that was now swaying gently in the air. I spent that day checking every doorway and corner. I found a few more threads near the kitchen window, along the edges of a shelf, and even one that crossed the top of the staircase. They didn't form a web exactly. They were more like random lines that somehow connected walls and furniture. Every time I tried to remove one, I felt that jolt, and I became more anxious about touching them. I started carrying scissors around the house. That turned out to be only partially helpful. The scissors would cut the threads, but each time the blades touched a strand, my hand suffered a stiff jolt, and my knuckles went numb for a few seconds. When I managed to cut a strand, part of it would fall to the floor, but it dissolved quickly, almost like it evaporated. Then, the next day, I'd find more strands in the exact same places. I decided to seal off certain rooms. I closed the door to the storage closet where the threads were thickest. I started avoiding the living room at night because I noticed more lines popping up around my couch and coffee table. I felt safer in the bedroom upstairs, where I hadn't found any threads yet, at least for a while. At night I tried to sleep, but I kept picturing those strands creeping under the door and stretching across my bedroom. I would wake up to use the bathroom, expecting to see lines waiting in the darkness. My heart pounded whenever I walked across the room. I kept a flashlight with me all the time. If I saw any stray glimmer, I would freeze in place until I was sure I could move without touching anything. One evening I tried to test a theory. I set up my phone to record video near the kitchen. I left it filming for several hours. The next day, I reviewed the footage. I saw faint flickers of movement in the corner of the frame, but I couldn't see a clear shape. The threads seemed to appear, then vanish. It looked like they were growing from nowhere, hanging in midair, then spreading across the room. I paused and replayed the footage several times, but it didn't give me any concrete explanation. There was no sign of an animal or a person, just flickers and those almost invisible strands weaving themselves around the furniture. My stomach clenched while I watched. I found myself sweating. The place felt hostile now, and I felt trapped. I started double-checking the front door and windows. I considered leaving, but I had nowhere else to go, and I'd already poured what little savings I had into this property. I told myself I'd find a practical solution. I bought thick gloves from a local hardware store. I also purchased some protective goggles and a face mask. It might have looked ridiculous, but I needed some barrier between me and the shocks. When I got home, I tried to clear one room entirely of strands. I wore gloves, long sleeves, and the mask. I used scissors to cut each thread I could find, letting the pieces fall to the ground. My arms tingled, but the gloves kept me from feeling the worst of it. After about 20 minutes, I had cleared the living room of every strand. I swept the floor to remove the leftover bits, which dissolved or just broke apart into nothing. I felt relieved. Then less than an hour later, I walked back into the living room and saw new lines drifting across the ceiling. They seemed to vibrate when I drew close, as if challenging me to cut them again. That night, I couldn't relax. I heard faint humming noises in the walls like a low buzz. I went around the house, pressing my ear to different surfaces. I didn't know if I was imagining it. My chest felt tight, and my breathing got shallow. My hands were sweating. I started pacing between the bedroom and the hallway, checking each corner for signs of more threads. I felt trapped in my own house, forced to dodge invisible lines just to get from one room to another. My body tensed up every time I sensed a presence. Sometimes I felt the static charge even before I saw a thread. I would stop in my tracks, shine the flashlight around, and sure enough, there would be another strand, hanging at shoulder level or knee height. It became a constant obstacle course. I tried to avoid going outside at night because the forest had even more strands. I shined a flashlight through the back window and saw them reflecting the light. They were everywhere, hanging from branches, crossing over the path, stretching between the trees. If I stepped out there, I wouldn't be able to move more than a few feet without bumping into them. The cold chills I had felt earlier seemed to intensify just from looking at them. It was as if the entire forest was layered with these lines. My neck and shoulders ached from tension. My pulse raced whenever I peered out into the darkness. On the 10th night, I woke up abruptly. I couldn't breathe right. My mouth was dry and my heart pounded. I felt a slight tug on my blanket. I bolted upright and flicked on the bedside lamp. I saw a thin strand running across the foot of my bed, attached to the blanket. I froze. I didn't want to move and risk touching it. My skin crawled. My mouth felt sour. I slowly reached for the scissors on my nightstand. My hand shook so much that I almost dropped them. I carefully slipped the blade under the strand. I cut it with one quick motion. I felt a jolt through the handle. My knuckles instantly went numb, and I bit my lip to keep from yelping. The piece of thread fell onto the blanket, then vanished, leaving a faint residue. I stared at the spot, breathing in and out until my chest loosened. That was the first time a thread appeared in my bedroom. I stayed up the rest of the night, sitting in the corner of the bed, holding the scissors with both hands. I kept the lamp on and scanned the room for more lines. I spotted 2 more near the ceiling and cut them as carefully as I could. By dawn, I was exhausted. I walked around the house, checking every room again. The living room had new lines across the couch. The hallway had them near the floor, almost ankle height. In the kitchen, I saw them over the sink, crossing from the faucet to the window frame. Each discovery made me more anxious. My hands trembled, and my throat felt tight. I wanted to get rid of these things for good, but they just kept coming back. Now I'm stuck in a routine of constant removal. Every morning I put on my gloves and mask. I cut down every strand I find. I feel that sharp static rush again and again, until my arms are sore and my head throbs. At night I barricade myself in the bedroom. I keep scissors by my side, plus a flashlight to spot any threads that form around the bed. I barely sleep. Sometimes I think about packing a bag and running, but I feel paralyzed by the fear that the forest outside is worse. I picture myself trying to push through a maze of threads out there, each one shocking me until I can't move anymore. I don't know how long I can keep doing this. My food supply is okay for now, but I dread going into the kitchen to cook. The chalet feels like a trap. I'm always on edge. My clothes smell stale because I don't want to risk walking outside to do laundry in town. My phone battery is almost dead, and the power outlets sometimes spark when the threads crawl up the walls. I focus on each moment, trying to avoid contact with the lines. My thoughts are jumpy. I just want to move around my own house without feeling that jolt. I want to walk through the forest without flinching, but I can't. Every day there are more threads. They multiply. They hang in the air, waiting. I'm sharing this because I need to let it out. I'm a grown man, and I can't even walk around my living room without scanning for these nearly invisible strands. My back hurts from ducking and weaving around them. My eyes ache from straining to see them. My jaw feels tight from gritting my teeth. I'm terrified that one day I'll wake up wrapped in them. I can't say what's causing this. I only know it's real and it's getting worse. My only plan is to keep cutting and keep going. If I can't find a permanent solution, I might have to abandon everything. But for now, I'm here, in a place where threads appear in every corner and that awful chill runs through my body every time I try to free myself. I'm tense, I'm tired, and I'm out of ideas. I felt something was off the second I stepped into that inn. It smelled stale, like wet wood and old sheets, and the reception area was too dark. The owner gave me a crooked smile and a heavy key. I tried not to stare at his yellowed nails. I just wanted a cheap place to crash while I did my work in that small town. I had no clue what I was about to get into. I got to my room around 8 p.m. It was nothing special. A narrow bed, one window with a view of the parking lot, and a rickety chair. The light flickered when I turned it on, and the wallpaper peeled near the ceiling. The floorboards squeaked every time I shifted my weight. I sat on the bed, tossed my luggage in the corner, and took out my phone. No signal. I sighed and tried to connect to the Wi-Fi. It worked, but it was slow, so I gave up on streaming any videos. My plan was to rest, then meet my contact in the morning. While brushing my teeth in the small bathroom, I heard something from down the hallway. It sounded like wood scraping against the floor. I paused and listened for a moment. It was a slow, repetitive dragging noise. I considered stepping out to check, but I was tired, so I let it go. I thought it was another guest or maybe the owner moving furniture around. The next morning, I woke up early, had a quick breakfast in the tiny dining area, and asked the owner about the noise. He shrugged and said maybe someone had trouble sleeping. Then I remembered the locked door at the end of the corridor. It had a heavy padlock on it. I asked him if that room was rented out. He shook his head and said, "It's just storage. Old stuff. Junk I don't need." He didn't elaborate. I didn't push it. I spent most of the day in town meeting people for work, checking out a local office space and grabbing lunch at a nearby diner. The day was uneventful, but I couldn't shake a feeling of unease. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it was just the depressing atmosphere of the inn. The wooden panels, the dim lights, and the weird smell in the hallways made me uncomfortable. Yet I stayed because it was cheap, and I didn't want to waste time looking for another place. Big mistake. That night I had trouble sleeping. I was restless, and the springs of the bed poked at my back. Around midnight, I heard the dragging sound again. It came from the end of the corridor where that locked door was. I listened carefully, my body tense. It started as a low scrape, followed by a dull thump. Then there were creaks like someone walking on old wood. I felt my chest tighten, and my breathing got shallow. I didn't like the idea of someone messing around near my room in the middle of the night. Maybe it was just the owner again, but it didn't sound casual. It sounded deliberate, like furniture being pushed, paused, then pushed again. I got up and put my ear to my own door. There were no voices, just that continuous scraping. Suddenly it stopped. My hand hovered over the doorknob, but I didn't open it. I was too jumpy. I stayed like that for a while, wondering if it would start again. It didn't. Eventually, I went back to bed and stared at the ceiling, feeling a knot in my stomach. The next morning, I saw the owner in the hallway. He was sweeping the floor with a stiff broom. I asked him again about any nighttime activity. He gave me a blank look and said he didn't hear anything. The way he answered felt too quick, like he didn't want to talk about it. His eyes flicked toward that locked door, then back at me. I dropped the subject, but I made a note to pay closer attention that night. When I returned from work in the evening, I decided to inspect the hallway. The locked room looked like any other door, but the padlock was big and rusted. I tried the handle gently. It didn't budge. I leaned in and smelled something, an odd scent that made me think of old wood and maybe some herbal smell. Then I realized it might be incense. It wasn't strong, but it was definitely noticeable. I felt a sudden wave of nausea and stepped back. My mouth went dry and my stomach churned a little. I backed away and returned to my room. After dinner, I decided to try and see if there was any gap I could peek through. I waited until it was quiet, around 10 p.m., and then tiptoed down the hallway. I crouched and put my eye to the keyhole. All I saw was darkness, but the smell of incense was stronger. It was almost overwhelming. My eyes started to water and I felt lightheaded. I pulled back, rubbing my face. I couldn't see a thing inside that room. No shapes, no outlines, just a deep blackness. I went back to my room with a weird tingling in my hands. I felt uneasy, like I'd done something I shouldn't have. That night, the noises were louder. I heard scraping, clanging, and muffled whispers. It sounded like more than one person. I couldn't make out any words, but the whispering was frantic and hushed, going back and forth. My heart pounded so hard that I couldn't sleep. I got up to use the bathroom and noticed a thin line of light under my door coming from the hallway. I reached for the doorknob and opened it a crack. The hallway lamp was on, but the locked door at the end remained dark. I closed my door quietly and locked it. I stayed up for hours listening. By 3 a.m., the noises subsided. I must have drifted off around 4 a.m. because I woke up at 7 a.m. to my alarm. I felt awful, like I hadn't rested at all. I splashed water on my face, grabbed a quick coffee, and headed out for another work meeting. During the day, I found myself thinking about that locked door. My instincts told me to leave, but I had one more day of business in this town. I tried to push the thoughts away. After finishing my meetings, I returned to the inn around 7 p.m. The owner wasn't at the reception desk. A small note said he'd be back soon. I went straight to my room. The hallway smelled different now, heavier and more pungent. My nose burned a bit. It was that same incense odor, only stronger, lingering in the corridor. I opened my room's door, dropped my bag, and sat on the bed, feeling tense. Around 10 p.m., I got ready for bed. I brushed my teeth, turned off the lights, and lay down. Every little sound made me jump. The floor creaked outside my door. I clenched my fists and stared at the ceiling, waiting. At about midnight, I heard a loud thump. It was the locked door. I was sure of it. It was like something fell against it from inside. Then the dragging started again, followed by a series of short knocks. It wasn't on my door, but on that locked one. The knocks were spaced out, maybe 3 or 4 seconds apart. I felt my heart race. I considered going out there, but I couldn't move. My legs felt weak. Around 2 a.m., I finally drifted off again, only to wake up around 3:30 a.m. to a dull glow in the hallway. It filtered in through the gap under my door. This time it wasn't the normal hallway light. It was a different color, maybe a warm yellow or orange, like candlelight. My chest tightened. I felt a rush of adrenaline, the kind you get when you sense danger. I swung my legs off the bed and put on my shoes. I told myself I'd check it out, but a part of me wanted to hide. I opened the door. The air smelled thick with incense. It made me cough. I saw that the door at the end of the hallway was open, or at least it looked that way. The padlock was hanging off the latch, unlocked. There was a glow coming from inside, but the angle made it hard to see. I took slow steps toward it, every floorboard squeaking under me. The corridor seemed longer than before, as if it stretched beyond the usual distance. My legs felt shaky. As I got closer, I noticed that there was some kind of space beyond the door. It wasn't just a small storage room. It looked like another corridor or a large chamber. I thought it was impossible because the inn was small, and beyond that wall should have been the parking lot. But there was definitely more space in there, maybe another hallway leading deeper. It didn't match the outside structure at all. I stopped a few feet away. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see a faint flicker of some light source inside. I heard a low humming or chanting. It was rhythmic, stopping and starting in short bursts. My stomach felt like it was tied in knots. My breaths were shallow, and I could feel beads of sweat on my forehead. The smell of incense was so powerful that I started to feel dizzy. My hands felt clammy and my heart was pounding. I thought about pushing the door wider, but something made me step back. I could see the corridor continuing inside, like it was twisting away from the angle of the main hallway. The walls looked different, almost like rough stone instead of the wooden paneling in the inn. I took another step back, trying to steady my breathing. My thoughts were racing. This can't be real. Where does that hallway go? The parking lot should be on the other side of this wall. I need to get out of here. But I also felt compelled to see more. I felt a bizarre urge to confirm I wasn't hallucinating. Before I could decide, I heard a shuffling sound from inside that hidden corridor. It was close. I froze and held my breath. I didn't see any movement, but I felt the air shift. My scalp prickled, and my pulse thundered in my ears. The chanting sound faded into complete silence. My entire body tensed, waiting for something to appear in the doorway. Nothing did, but I sensed someone or something near. The silence felt too heavy. I backed away inch by inch until I reached my door. I didn't take my eyes off that open doorway. The corridor still looked stretched and distorted, as if someone had rearranged the architecture overnight. I slipped into my room, locked the door, and stood against it, my chest rising and falling with panicked breaths. My mouth was dry. I kept expecting footsteps to come charging down the hall. After a long while, I peeked through the peephole. The hallway outside my room was dark. The glow was gone, and I could barely see the locked door at the end. It was shut again, padlock in place. That made no sense. I had just seen it open. The light was there, the smell was there, but now, everything looked normal, except for the faint smell of incense still lingering. I started to wonder if I was losing my mind. My heart was still pounding and my skin felt clammy. I checked the time on my phone, 4:02 a.m. I stayed awake the rest of the night, sitting on my bed with the lamp on. Every noise made me jump. I wasn't sure what was real anymore. At some point, I opened my phone's camera and tried to record, but there was nothing to capture. The hallway was quiet. No more light. No chanting. Just the faint creaks of an old building. By sunrise, I decided I couldn't spend another night there. I packed my bag in a hurry. I didn't bother with breakfast. I just wanted to get out. When I walked toward the reception area, the owner was there looking tired and a bit annoyed. I placed my room key on the counter and told him I was checking out early. He asked why, and I said I just needed to leave. He pressed for a reason, but I didn't want to get into it. I felt a surge of anger toward him for brushing me off about those noises. But I also felt a wave of relief that I was finally leaving. He gave me a polite nod, and I went outside. The morning air was cool, and the sunlight felt reassuring. I loaded my stuff into my car. Before I drove away, I looked back at the building. The windows were grimy and the sign was missing letters. It looked ordinary, but in a neglected way. There was no sign of that corridor, no sign of anything supernatural from the outside. I drove off, feeling the tension in my shoulders slowly ease. In the rearview mirror, the inn got smaller and smaller until it disappeared behind a row of trees. I kept telling myself it was over, that I was out of that place. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel and I had to pull over at a gas station to calm down. I told myself I would never go back there. Even now, I can't figure out what I saw. I'm certain there was a space behind that locked door that shouldn't exist. I heard the noises, I smelled the incense, I felt the floor stretch under my feet. It wasn't just in my head. Something was there, and it wanted to be hidden. I don't care if I never find out what it was. I'm just glad I got out. I think about it sometimes when I'm trying to sleep. I remember the low scraping, the whispers, the chanting. I can still feel the weight in my chest. I can still smell that heavy incense that made me sick. It took me days to feel normal again. I told a colleague about it, but he laughed and said maybe I was overtired. I dropped the subject. Part of me wants to warn people about that place, but I don't have a solid explanation. All I have is the memory of that long, impossible corridor, and the dread I felt looking into it. I haven't stayed in a small inn since then. I'd rather pay more for a chain hotel, with normal hallways and normal doors. Even if something strange happens in a big hotel, I feel like there's enough people around to notice. That dusty inn, with its owner who acted like nothing was wrong, convinced me to trust my instincts. The moment I see a place that feels off, I'm leaving right away. I'm not waiting around for locked doors to open in the middle of the night. That's all I've got. I haven't gone back and I don't plan to. I don't care if there's some logical explanation. I don't want to know. Sometimes it's safer to stay ignorant. All I know is that I experienced something I still can't explain. And whatever was in that room, whatever made those noises and caused that corridor to stretch, stays locked in my mind. I'm just relieved I made it out without losing my sanity. If anyone else ends up in that inn, I can only hope they ignore their curiosity and get out fast. Because once you see that door open, you can't unsee it. And you'll never forget how it feels to stand on the edge of something that shouldn't exist. I never thought I'd feel uneasy in my own living room, but that night changed everything. I had this big fireplace I barely used. It sat against the far wall, always cold and dark, waiting for someone to spark it alive. The room itself felt normal enough. A sofa, a TV, a coffee table with some magazines, and a thin rug across the hardwood floor. But when the temperature dropped and the house got too cold, I decided to light a fire for the first time in months. I didn't expect to hear anything strange, I just wanted some warmth. Now I can't look at the fireplace without feeling my stomach tighten and my hands start to tremble. I started by grabbing some old newspaper and a bundle of small kindling from a bag I kept in the corner of the garage. I placed the paper in a loose mound on the fireplace grate, then laid the sticks on top. I found a few larger logs stacked outside, still dry from the last time I tried to build a fire. It was pretty cold, and I could feel the chill in my fingertips. My breath looked like faint steam in front of me every time I exhaled. I lit a match and touched it to the newspaper. It caught quickly, and the flames spread across the thin pages. Soon, the kindling started to crackle. The sound was soft at first, just a light hiss and pop. I added a heavier log once the sticks had started to burn a little more steadily. I was hungry for the heat, shivering whenever a draft came in from a gap in the old windows. I stood there, watching the fire come to life. The flames made the walls flicker with these jerky shapes, and the shadows jumped around like they were alive. I felt a bit of relief as the warmth spread outward. It wasn't much at first, but it was something. I dragged an old armchair closer so I could sit in front of the fireplace and read a magazine. I flipped through some pages, not really focusing on the articles, just letting my hands warm up near the fire. Then I heard this low sound, like a distant voice. It was almost like a rumble, but I thought maybe it was just the wind outside. The chimney sometimes rattles when a gust hits. I tried to ignore it. I kept reading, turning another page. But the noise didn't stop. It sounded like someone muttering. I closed the magazine and listened carefully, leaning forward. My body tensed up. I could hear my heartbeat pulsing in my ears, and my mouth went dry. The sound was faint, but it was definitely a voice. It reminded me of a deep hum, like someone chanting in a language I didn't recognize. I stood up and backed away from the fireplace. I felt the hair on my arm stand on end and my neck muscles tightened. I glanced behind me, wondering if the TV was on. It wasn't. The house was quiet, except for that low murmur. It seemed to come from the fire itself, or maybe from inside the chimney. I tried to reassure myself. I thought it could be the wind playing tricks. I walked over to the windows to check if they were fully shut. And they were. No air was pushing through. The murmur continued, kind of pulsing with the flames. Every time the fire crackled, I heard a slight rise in the volume of that voice. It made me feel uneasy, like my gut was twisting. I didn't know what to do, so I just stood there. My legs felt shaky, but I forced myself to walk toward the fireplace again. When I leaned in, the heat hit my face. It was strong and a bit uncomfortable, but I wanted to hear the noise more clearly. It was a rhythmic murmur, like chanting. The words were nothing I'd ever heard. I kept thinking it was Latin or some old language, but I couldn't place it. The voice sounded guttural and deep. I felt my chest tighten and I swallowed hard. My mouth was so dry I could taste the stale air. I tried to put it out of my mind and told myself I was overreacting. Maybe it was just the logs settling or the wind funneling through the chimney in a weird way. So I added more wood to keep the fire going. Right when I dropped the next piece of oak into the flames, the murmur grew louder. It wasn't just my imagination. It was like the voice got stronger with the fresh fuel. I stumbled back a step, feeling my stomach clench. The wood crackled, and the voice rose in pitch. It formed a few sharp sounds that almost sounded like words. I backed away, breathing a little faster. I felt a cold sweat on my forehead, even though the fire made the room hot. My hands were damp, and my heart was pounding. I stared at the flames, and for a moment I thought I saw a shape move inside. It shifted like a face trying to push through the flickering light. It looked distorted, more like a silhouette than an actual face. The eyes seemed to glare at me, full of anger or maybe hunger. I felt my throat tighten, and I had to force myself to swallow again. I whispered to myself, "This can't be real." But it looked real. The flames bent and twisted, and the face almost looked like it was mouthing silent words. I felt an urge to run out of the house, but I stayed put. My legs felt heavy, like they were locked in place. My breathing grew uneven, and I could feel my pulse in my temples. I moved to the couch, trying to keep some distance. The voice kept going. It rose and fell like it was calling out for something. It sounded like it was inside the chimney, maybe behind the bricks. I glanced at the walls, half expecting them to start moving. I didn't see anything else, but the voice wouldn't stop. I took my phone out of my pocket. I thought about calling someone, anyone, but I didn't know what to say. If I told someone about a voice coming from my fireplace, they'd think I was losing it. I put the phone down and considered grabbing a flashlight to check the chimney. That idea made my chest tighten again. I didn't want to stick my head up there. The flames flickered, casting more shadows across the walls. Every time I saw a shape move, I jerked my head around, expecting to see something lurking. My skin tingled with a mix of fear and the heat of the fire. The voice kept chanting, and the words started to sound more pronounced. I caught hints of syllables, maybe something like kor or maru, but it was all jumbled. It was nothing familiar. My legs were jittery, and I paced around the living room trying to calm down. I reached for a glass of water on the kitchen counter and gulped it down. My throat burned with dryness. I grabbed another piece of wood from the basket near the fireplace, thinking maybe I should let the fire die instead of feeding it. But the thought of letting it burn out completely also felt wrong, like the darkness would be worse than the flames. I placed the wood on the grate anyway, hoping the fire would just fade soon if I didn't stoke it too much. As soon as the wood landed, the voice surged again, louder, deeper. It felt like the whole room vibrated for a second, like a soft rumble. I almost dropped to my knees. My heart was racing and my ears were ringing. I screamed at the flames, "What do you want?" My voice sounded weak compared to that rumbling chant. I was sweating, and my shirt clung to my back. The heat felt oppressive, like it was pressing down on me. I wiped my forehead and moved away. The chanting continued, but now I could swear there was a pattern to it, something like a repeated phrase or command. I didn't want to decipher it. I felt a panic building in my chest. My eyes darted around the room looking for something to defend myself with, even though I had no idea what I was defending against. I grabbed the poker near the fireplace, holding it like a weapon. My hands were shaking. I realized how ridiculous I looked pointing a fireplace poker at the fire itself. But I didn't care. I just wanted some sense of protection. The chanting got louder for a moment, then dipped into a lower tone. It sounded mocking, like it was laughing at me. I could hear a harsh scraping noise in the chimney, as if something was moving against the bricks. My scalp tingled, and my jaw clenched so tight it started to ache. I thought about leaving the house and spending the night somewhere else, but I couldn't just leave a fire burning in my living room. I also didn't want to put it out and let that thing hide in the darkness. My mind raced through possibilities. Maybe I was just exhausted or hallucinating, but everything felt real. The heat was real. The voice was real. I decided to sit down on the couch again, just to gather my thoughts. My heart was pounding so hard that my chest felt sore. I stared at the flames, and the face appeared again. It was clearer this time, like a twisted mask forming out of the fire. The lips seemed to move, and the chanting matched the movements. It looked angry and curious, like it was studying me. My stomach knotted and my throat felt tight. I could smell the burning wood and a slight sulfur-like odor. It was faint, but it made me feel sick. I clenched my teeth and tried to regulate my breathing. I told myself I would wait until the fire weakened, then I'd douse it with water. I didn't want to go near it yet. That voice kept rising in volume, then fading. It made me feel like it was responding to the flames themselves. Every time the logs crackled, the voice grew stronger. Every time the fire settled down a bit, the voice fell into a whisper. I checked the time on my phone. It was after midnight. The room was hot now, almost uncomfortably hot. I felt a little lightheaded, probably from the heat and fear. I opened a window a crack just to let in some fresh air. The cool breeze hit my face and I breathed in the cold. My arms were covered in goosebumps even though I was sweating. I stayed on the couch, gripping the poker in one hand, eyes on the fire. The face in the flame seemed to shift, like it was pressing forward. I thought I saw it grin, but it was hard to tell. I kept hearing those muttered words, that guttural chant. I felt the vibrations in my chest, almost like a slow drumbeat. My mind started to race with questions. Was I losing it? Or was something really there? The logs in the fireplace began to settle, collapsing a little. Sparks flew up, and a few embers popped out onto the hearth. I jumped and used the poker to push them back. Every move I made felt stiff and shaky, like my body was stuck in slow motion. The chanting got louder again, then it dropped into a rasp, like a low growl. I forced myself to stand. My legs were cramped from fear and from sitting so tense. I walked over to the corner, grabbed a metal bucket, and filled it halfway with water from the kitchen sink. I had a flashlight on the counter, so I stuffed it in my pocket just in case. My stomach churned and I felt dizzy. I took a few breaths to steady myself. Then I walked back into the living room, setting the bucket near the fireplace. The chanting grew sharper, almost like a warning. My forehead was slick with sweat. I could smell my own nervous sweat, and it made me even more uncomfortable. My lungs felt tight, but I held onto the bucket's handle, knuckles white. I inched closer to the hearth. The face looked more pronounced now. The eyes seemed to burn right into me, and the mouth open like it was shouting. I actually felt my knees weaken, but I pressed forward. I took a deep breath, lifted the bucket, and tossed the water onto the flames. Steam exploded out, and the chanting rose to a loud roar. I staggered back, covering my mouth with my free hand. For a split second, I heard a sharp, angry tone, almost like an outraged shout. The room filled with smoke and hot mist, making me cough. My eyes watered and I could barely see. I struggled to get the window open wider. Cold air rushed in, mixing with the smoke. My lungs burned as I coughed. My eyes stung. I waved my hand in front of my face, trying to clear the air. The fire hissed and sputtered, still glowing in patches. The chanting was just a faint rumble now. I waited, holding my breath in short intervals, letting the smoke thin out. As the steam and smoke cleared, the living room grew cold. The logs were charred and smoldering, but the flames were gone. The voice had faded to almost nothing. I stared at the fireplace, heart pounding, sweat cooling on my skin. I felt dizzy and drained, like I'd run a marathon. I approached the fireplace again, breathing through my mouth. I could see small embers glowing faintly. There was no face in the embers. The chanting was gone, replaced by a soft crackle. The air smelled like wet ash. I kept the poker in my hand, tapping the embers, making sure they were out. Every little hiss made me jump, but there was no more voice. I collapsed on the couch, my body shaking. My heart rate was still high, and my thoughts were all over the place. The house felt cold again. My face was hot, but the rest of me was chilled. I didn't know if I should stay awake or try to sleep. I decided to sit there for a while, listening to the quiet. Eventually, my breathing slowed and the tension in my shoulders lessened a bit. I stayed up until morning, watching the fireplace, making sure the fire stayed out. I could still hear the echo of that chanting in my head, but I didn't hear it anymore in the house. The night went by slowly. Every few minutes, I'd check the chimney with my flashlight, half expecting to see something lurking, but it was just dark and empty. When the first light of morning came in through the windows, I finally let myself move away from the couch. My body felt exhausted and my clothes were damp from sweat. I opened more windows and let the cold morning air sweep through the living room. The fireplace looked ordinary again, just blackened logs and some ash. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been in there, something that stirred when I fed the fire. I haven't used the fireplace since that night. The thought of hearing that voice again makes my chest tighten. Even now, when I glance at the fireplace, I imagine I see a faint outline of that twisted face. Sometimes I think I hear a low murmur, like a memory. I try to ignore it. I keep the damper closed and the grate locked. I don't want to risk waking whatever was in those flames. I just live with the cold now. It's better than hearing that voice again. I heard the voice for the first time on a Wednesday night. I was sitting in my living room, staring at the TV. It was around 11 o'clock. The sound came from under the floorboards like a whisper sliding through a gap in the wood. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But the voice had a strange rhythm and it felt too real to ignore. My chest tightened and I turned off the TV. I waited in silence, ears straining. Then it came again. Low, soft, almost like someone drawing out breathy words. It sounded like it was saying my name, but I wasn't sure. My stomach twisted and I got up from the couch, stepping around slowly. The voice followed me, always beneath the same spot on the floor. My palms started sweating, and I felt my heart hammering in my chest. I stood over the area and tried to listen, but it vanished. I laughed at myself, thinking it might be a pipe or something. Still, I could feel a subtle vibration in the boards under my feet. I've lived in this old two-story place my whole life. My parents left it to me when they moved to another state, and I decided to stay. It's not fancy. The walls show scuff marks, the paint is peeling in some corners, and the floors creak with every step. But it's home. I've always found it comfortable despite the quirks. Lately, though, I can't ignore the weird feeling in the living room. Whenever I sit on my couch, I notice a slight tremor that runs through the floor. It feels like a low pulse. My shoulders tense up when I sense it. It's nothing like a normal house settling, and it's definitely not just the wind. Sometimes, late at night, the boards feel warm under my feet, like there's a faint heat source below. I crouch down, press my ear against the wood, and wait. The voice doesn't always show up, but when it does, it's clear that it's not some random noise. A few days after the first time I heard it, I tried to ignore everything. I turned the TV volume up, left music playing on my phone, anything to drown out the possibility of that whisper. But I still felt that throbbing in the floor, and my gut told me something was off. One evening, I turned everything off and stood barefoot on the living room floor. The boards were slightly cool. My heart pounded because I was half expecting to hear that voice. Sure enough, a faint whisper rose from below, sounding closer than before. The hair on my arm stood up. I swallowed hard and leaned down, pressing an ear to the wood. The whisper sounded like an old language, not something I recognized. My name seemed to blend in with the murmurs like a soft call hidden in a string of unfamiliar words. My hands started trembling and I jerked my head up, stepping back. My mind raced with questions. Is there someone under my house? Is it an echo from somewhere else? I couldn't come up with any logical explanation, but I knew I couldn't let it go. That night I barely slept. I live alone, and the silence in my bedroom felt huge. The walls seemed to expand and close in at the same time. I could almost feel that throbbing through the mattress, but I wasn't sure if it was real or just my nerves. Around 3 a.m, I finally got up and walked quietly down the hallway to the living room. I stood at the doorway, peering at the floor. The moonlight came through the window, shining on the old boards. Everything looked normal, but my pulse was racing. I inched forward, expecting to hear something, but it stayed quiet. Still, a pressure in the air made my skin crawl. I didn't step off the rug that night. I just stared at the floor, my mouth dry, my heart pounding in my ears. Eventually, I went back to bed with a tight knot in my gut, feeling like I was stuck in some weird standoff with the space under my house. Over the next few days, I tried logical solutions. I checked the plumbing. I walked around outside the house to see if there was a loose vent or a strange draft. I examined the crawl space hatch in the backyard. It's an old wooden door near the foundation, about half a foot above ground level. I'd never liked going down there because it's cramped and dusty, but I convinced myself it was necessary. The day I decided to check it, the sky was overcast and the air felt humid. I knelt down in the yard, my jeans pressing into the damp grass, and yanked the hatch open. A musty smell rushed out. I found a flashlight and aimed it inside. The space looked about as I expected. Dirt floor, cobwebs, bits of insulation falling from between the joists. I crawled in on my elbows, the flashlight bouncing against the ground. My chest felt tight. I moved slowly, scanning the beams overhead and the dark corners. My heart thundered so loudly I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I stayed under there for about 10 minutes, shining the light around. I found nothing odd, just a few old pipes, wiring, and the typical signs of age. At one point, I tapped on the underside of the living room floor. It made a hollow thud. I paused and listened, holding my breath. I felt sweat forming under my arms. Nothing replied to me, and I let out a shaky breath. My shoulders relaxed a bit. I crawled out, dirty and relieved. The hatch creaked when I closed it, and I headed back inside. I washed my hands in the kitchen, trying to calm myself. It seemed like everything was normal. Maybe I just imagined the voice. But the moment I stepped back into the living room, I caught a faint echo of that whisper again. It slid under my skin like a chill. My nerves spiked and I felt the muscles in my neck tighten. I realized that nothing had changed. Whatever was under there, it wasn't something I could see or explain in a simple way. By the end of that week, I was obsessed with finding answers. My routine changed. I stopped meeting friends for drinks, skipped watching movies in the evening, and spent my free time hovering around the living room. Every time I sat on the couch, I felt the boards vibrate. It wasn't strong enough to shake anything off the shelves, but it was noticeable once you were aware of it. The whispers were unpredictable. Sometimes they were louder, and sometimes they were barely a breath, but they always felt directed at me. My stomach churned whenever I picked up on it. My heart would pound, and my throat would go dry. I started carrying a small crowbar around the house, thinking I might pry up some floorboards if I heard the voice at full strength again. But something held me back. Part of me worried about what I would find. Another part of me didn't want to damage the only home I knew. And if I'm honest, I was scared of going too far. My sleep got worse. I'd wake up in a sweat, my mind echoing with that soft chant. I couldn't identify any real words, but it felt ancient. On one particularly bad night, I heard it around 2 in the morning. It sounded like it was right under my bed, even though the bedroom floor is on the second level. I shot upright, heart racing, and I could still hear it through the walls. I raced downstairs in my pajamas, flipping on every light as I went. The living room lights buzzed. The moment I entered, the floor let out a dull thump, like it was greeting me. I stopped, panting, fear crawling through my chest. Then the voice faded. I stood there, not sure if I wanted to throw up or scream. After a few minutes, I forced myself to kneel down and press my ear to the floor. My heart pounded, and my breathing was uneven. The whisper was so faint I could barely catch it, but it was still there, repeating something under the boards. I decided to make a plan. I was done feeling helpless. The next day, I went to the hardware store and bought a new flashlight, a dust mask, and a stronger crowbar. I also got a portable work lamp to set up underneath the house if I had to crawl around there again. My hands shook as I paid for everything. I came home, set the items on my kitchen table, and paced back and forth. The idea of ripping open the floor felt dramatic, but I didn't know what else to do. My body was always tense, and I had lost a lot of sleep. I figured that if I found nothing, at least I'd be able to reassure myself it was all in my head. By late afternoon, I moved the coffee table aside, threw the rug to one corner, and placed the crowbar next to the longest floorboard in the middle of the room. I stood there staring at it, heart racing. My skin felt cold, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I couldn't hear the whisper right then, but the silence itself was unnerving. It took me half an hour to get the nerve to wedge the crowbar under the first board. I pried it up, hearing the nails squeal. Dust puffed out, making me cough. My forehead was damp with sweat. Under the board, I saw insulation and darkness. The flashlight beam cut through the gap, but I didn't see anything unusual. I moved to the next board, careful not to break too much. Each time the nails groaned, my chest tightened. My shoulders felt stiff and sore. After removing 3 boards, I had a decent opening. The air from below smelled stale. I clicked on the flashlight and aimed it inside. It looked just like the crawl space I'd seen outside, only from another angle. I couldn't spot any hidden room or passage. Still, I couldn't shake that feeling that something was watching me. I sat back on my heels, swallowing hard. My throat felt rough. The house was silent, but my ears were ringing from the tension. I stared into that dark opening for a while. Finally, I decided I had to go in. I stretched out on my stomach, lowering myself part way, my feet still on the living room floor. My flashlight moved over dirt, old spider webs, and wooden beams. I heard a small drip from a pipe. The crawl space was just big enough for me to squeeze around, but I didn't see anything out of place. Suddenly, I felt a pulse in the boards behind me. It was gentle, but I sensed it through my knees. My heart jumped. I twisted around, shining the flashlight back toward the living room. Nothing was there, but that pulse came again. My ears started buzzing. I breathed in and out, trying to steady myself. Then faintly, I heard the whisper. It was clearer than ever, like it was flowing through the wood itself. My name surfaced in the sound. My skin prickled and my pulse pounded in my neck. I scrambled backward, almost hitting my head on the floorboards. My chest rose and fell with sharp breaths, and I didn't care about the dust or the dirt in my clothes. I crawled out of the hole, stood up, and grabbed the crowbar tightly. The whisper stopped again. I felt my legs shaking, and my eyes burned from the strain of staring into the dark. I glanced around the living room, half expecting something to jump out, but everything looked normal. The TV was off, the couch was in its usual place, and the shelves were lined with my books and random knickknacks. Nothing seemed threatening except for that open gap in the floor. I stood there, trying to steady my breathing. After a minute, I set down the crowbar and picked up my flashlight. I considered going back under with the work lamp, but I couldn't force myself to do it right then. Instead, I hammered the boards back in place. My hands were trembling the entire time, and the nails didn't go in straight. I decided I needed a break, so I went to the kitchen, drank a glass of water, and leaned against the sink. My mouth felt dry even after chugging the entire glass. The quiet pressed in on my ears, but I didn't hear the voice at that moment. I tried to focus on the tasks in front of me, put the rug back, fix the couch, and try to relax. I placed the work lamp and extra tools in a corner of the living room within reach if I changed my mind. My shirt stuck to my back, and I realized I was drenched in sweat. I felt tired, but I also felt wired. Sleep seemed impossible, but my eyes stung from fatigue. That night I sat on the couch with all the lights on, staring at the section of the floor I'd pried up. The boards didn't line up perfectly anymore, and that gap reminded me of how close I got to that weird whisper. I didn't have music or the TV on. I wanted to hear everything clearly. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt my jaw clenching. Hours passed without any sign of the voice. My muscles were stiff, and my eyes kept darting to the edges of the floor where it met the walls. Around 2 a.m, I dozed off for a few minutes. Then I jerked awake, feeling that slow vibration again. The living room lamp flickered, or maybe my eyes just twitched. The whisper rose up like a soft gust of air below me. It was almost comforting and threatening at the same time. My muscles tensed, and my breath came in shallow spurts. I leaned forward, my hands on my knees, staring at the floor. "What do you want?" I said in a low voice, though I didn't expect an answer. The whisper continued, circling my name, never quite forming a direct reply. My head started to spin, and I forced myself to stand up, grabbing the back of the couch for support. Right now, as I record this, the board I pulled up is still not fixed correctly. It creaks under the slightest pressure. There's a chill in the air, though I have the windows closed. I keep the flashlight next to me at all times, and I haven't been able to sleep in my bedroom for the last few nights. I don't know exactly what's under my house, but I can't pretend it's just pipes or wind. The voice keeps calling, and I feel it vibrating through the walls and the floor. My instincts tell me I should leave, but I can't bring myself to do that. This is my home, and I feel like I have to face whatever is down there. Even if I can't explain it, I need to see it. I'm afraid that if I ignore it, the voice will keep growing stronger until it's all I can hear. I'm afraid of what I might find, but I'm more afraid to live with the uncertainty. So I'm staying. I'm listening. And I'm waiting for the moment when I can finally look beneath this floor and demand some kind of answer. I still remember the first time that phone rang. I was sitting on my couch, flipping through channels on an old TV, and I heard that muffled ring echo through my living room. It sent a strange vibration through my chest. I didn't even realize I had picked up an antique phone at the thrift store earlier that day. It was a random impulse purchase. I'd been feeling bored, restless, and a bit lonely, so I decided to browse a local secondhand shop. I saw this rotary phone on a dusty shelf, and the faded beige color caught my eye. It reminded me of something I might have seen in my grandparents' house years ago. It was cheap, so I took it home. There was no grand reason behind it. At the time, I just thought it looked kind of cool. I put the phone on a small table near my couch. I didn't have a landline connection, and I didn't plan to get one. I only use my cell phone for calls, so the old rotary phone was more like a decoration. It sat there for a few days, gathering more dust until that night when it rang. The sound wasn't loud and clear like a normal ring. It was dull, almost like it was coming from another room. But I knew it was the phone. It kept ringing, a slow, dragging sound, so I walked over and picked up the receiver. I pressed the receiver to my ear and I heard heavy breathing. It was loud, but also distant. It reminded me of someone standing in a dark hallway, leaning close without speaking. I said, "Hello?" because I didn't know what else to say. There was no answer, just this slow, raspy breathing. After a few seconds, a voice whispered something that made my hands start shaking. It was my own voice repeating a simple thought I'd had earlier in the day. I'd been sitting in traffic thinking, "I hate this commute, it's too long." I never said it out loud. I only thought it. Yet here it was, repeated back to me in a hushed tone on a phone that wasn't connected. I felt a chill run through my arms. I hung up quickly. My heart was racing and my stomach felt tight. I stood there, staring at the phone for a few minutes, trying to understand what had just happened. I checked the cord. It wasn't plugged into anything. No phone jack, no power outlet, nothing. I told myself it had to be some kind of joke or maybe a weird malfunction. It didn't ring again that night, but I couldn't sleep well. Every small sound in my apartment made my ears perk up. I lay in bed, turning from one side to the other, thinking about that phone and that whispered line. I even got up a few times to check if the phone was still there, or if I'd dreamed the whole thing. It was right where I'd left it, silent and dark. The next day, I tried to focus on work. I do tech support from home, so I spend hours on my computer. While I listened to clients complaining about software glitches, I kept replaying the phone call in my head. I couldn't help thinking about the voice repeating something I only thought about in my car. By the evening, I managed to convince myself I might have been half asleep, or maybe I just imagined the whole thing. That same night, though, the phone rang again. It happened around 10 p.m. I was standing in the kitchen heating up a frozen dinner. I heard that same low ring. The hairs on my arms stood up. My mouth went dry. For a moment I hesitated, thinking maybe I should ignore it. But curiosity got the better of me, so I walked over and picked it up. Again I heard breathing, slower this time. Then I heard a faint whisper. Why do I keep ignoring my phone calls at work? My heart pounded. I had that exact thought earlier. I'd been annoyed at myself for letting a few calls go to voicemail. I never said it out loud. It was just a passing thought. When I heard it repeated back to me, I felt my neck tighten, like I couldn't swallow. I hung up without saying anything. I stood there with sweat forming on my forehead, trying to wrap my head around this situation. I grabbed the phone from the table and inspected it. I checked inside the rotary dial, the base, the cord. I wanted to see if someone had hidden a speaker or some device inside. It looked normal. Dusty, old, a bit worn, but no signs of tampering. The rest of that night, I kept the phone unplugged from everything. It had no power source. It shouldn't have been able to ring. But around 10 p.m. the next night, there it went again. I almost jumped off the couch. I tossed the blanket aside, stood up, and considered tossing the whole phone in the trash. But I was too curious. I wanted to know if it would repeat another private thought. Sure enough, when I answered, I heard my own voice whisper a line I'd thought that morning while brushing my teeth. I need to replace that flickering light in the hallway. I felt my throat tighten again. My arms got goosebumps. I slammed the receiver down. I grabbed the phone and threw it into the hallway closet, under some old coats. Then I paced around my living room, breathing fast, trying to calm down. My hands were shaky and my mouth felt dry. The phone didn't ring again that night, or if it did, I didn't hear it. I woke up a few times, sweating. Sure, I'd heard a muffled ring, but it might have been my imagination. The next morning, I pulled it out of the closet. I wanted to see if removing the phone from plain sight would fix the issue. Maybe the phone was picking up radio waves or something else. I don't know much about antique electronics. I fiddled with the ringer switch. There was a small knob on the side. I turned it to off, figuring that might stop the ringing if it was some weird mechanical quirk. I didn't hear any ring during the day. I even stayed near the closet just to listen. Silence. But that night, at exactly 10 p.m., the phone rang again. The sound was muffled because it was inside the closet, but it was loud enough to make me jump. I felt this twist in my gut, like something was reaching through the walls. I yanked the closet door open, grabbed the phone, and picked up the receiver. This time, the whisper was quieter. It said something I'd thought while on the toilet that morning. It was a private thought, something I definitely didn't say out loud. Hearing it repeated to me like that made my stomach churn. I almost dropped the phone. My hands felt clammy, and my head started to pound. I tried to speak. I said, "Who's there? What do you want?" But I only heard heavy breathing. Then the line clicked off. I stood there, breathing hard, feeling this creeping sense of dread. I placed the phone back on the receiver and stared at it. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. That night, I barely slept. Over the next few days, I tried different things. I tried covering the phone with a thick blanket. I tried unplugging the ringer wire inside the phone by opening up the case. I even tried leaving it outside on the balcony, hoping the cold would somehow stop it from functioning. None of that worked. Every night at exactly 10 p.m., the phone would ring. I'd pick it up, and I'd hear a whisper repeating something I'd only thought in my head earlier that day. It was never anything big or dramatic. It was always simple stuff like being irritated at a neighbor's noise or telling myself I needed to buy more milk. But the fact that the phone repeated these thoughts word for word left me on edge. I felt trapped. During the day, I started watching my thoughts, worried that they'd come back to haunt me at night. My chest felt tight from the constant anxiety. My mouth stayed dry and my head ached. My appetite faded. I spent hours pacing my apartment, trying to figure out a rational explanation. I searched online for any stories about haunted phones or electronic anomalies. I found a few random forums with people talking about weird phone issues, but nothing like this. Some people claimed to have heard ghostly voices or static from disconnected phones, but nobody said anything about repeated private thoughts. One afternoon, I decided I'd had enough. I took the phone, wrapped it in a plastic bag, and drove across town to a dumpster behind a strip mall. I tossed the phone in there. Then I drove home, feeling relieved. I felt like I'd broken free of a curse. But at 10 p.m. that night, I heard the ring. I nearly fell off my couch. The sound was coming from my hallway closet. I opened the closet door and the phone was sitting there on the shelf, not wrapped in any plastic bag. My legs went weak. I froze, holding the doorknob. The phone rang again. My mind felt scrambled. I knew I had thrown that phone away. Yet here it was, as if it never left. I didn't want to pick it up, but I also couldn't ignore it. I lifted the receiver. I heard the whisper repeating something I'd thought earlier about how annoyed I was at my own reflection in the mirror. My breathing sped up, and I almost felt dizzy. I forced myself to stay upright, slammed the receiver down, and took a step back. I couldn't make sense of any of this. Over the next few days, I tried smashing the phone. I took a hammer to it in my kitchen. I broke the rotary dial. I shattered the plastic cover. I snapped wires. I made it into a mess of broken parts. My arms hurt from hammering, and I worked up a sweat. I was panting by the time I was done. Then I dumped the pieces into a trash bag and took it to the curb outside my building. When I got back to my apartment, I felt shaky but a bit calmer, like I'd finally solved the problem. That night, I was in bed around 10 p.m. My heart was racing as I waited. I didn't hear anything at first. Then I heard that same muffled ring coming from the living room. I grabbed my baseball bat from under the bed and walked out slowly. My pulse was racing. My scalp felt tight, and I had goosebumps on my arms. The broken phone was back on the small table near my couch, looking like it had never been smashed. It was intact. The dial was whole, the cord was fine. It rang again, that low, distant sound. I felt a wave of nausea. I forced myself to pick up the receiver. My hands were trembling. I put it to my ear and the whisper repeated a thought I'd had while making coffee that morning. I need to buy more sugar. It was such a mundane thought, but hearing it repeated by this impossible phone made my chest tighten. I slammed the receiver down, stepped away, and fell onto the couch. My head was pounding, and my palms were sweaty. I tried to live with it for a few weeks. Every night the phone would ring at 10 p.m., and I'd pick up, hear my private thought from that day, hang up, and sit there feeling shaken. My sleep schedule fell apart. I started waking up covered in sweat, checking the phone at random hours. Sometimes I just stared at it, waiting for it to ring. During the day, I kept my mind as blank as possible, worried about what might get repeated next. I barely left my apartment, and I stopped talking to friends or neighbors. Whenever I heard someone in the hallway, I felt this weird fear, like they might notice something off about me. One night, I tried unplugging my router and turning off my cell phone, thinking maybe some strange hacking was involved. It didn't make any difference. At 10 p.m., I heard that same ring, like a dull bell in my living room. I walked over, feeling weak. My legs shook. I picked up the receiver and listened to the whisper repeat a frustrated thought I'd had about my neighbor's loud music earlier in the day. I felt exposed, like someone was crawling around inside my head. I tried talking to the phone, demanding it explain itself, asking who or what was on the other end. I only heard breathing and the click of the line ending. I tried ignoring the phone for a couple of nights, but it kept ringing until I picked up. It wouldn't stop. The sound echoed through my apartment like a faint alarm, and I felt trapped by it. I decided to move the phone to a storage unit I rent on the other side of town. I drove out there during the day, put the phone in a cardboard box, locked the unit, and came home. I felt relieved, but also on edge, worried it might just appear in my apartment again. When 10 p.m. came, I heard nothing. My apartment was finally quiet. I almost cried from relief. I actually slept a full night for the first time in weeks. But around noon the next day, I heard a ring. It wasn't 10 p.m. It was midday, which was new. It sounded like it was coming from my living room. My stomach knotted up. I walked over and saw the phone sitting on the small table again. It looked the same, like it had never left. The ring continued until I answered it. Then I heard a whisper of a thought I'd had while driving back from the storage unit. Maybe this is finally over. That's when I realized there was no escaping it. I couldn't throw it away, smash it, or hide it. Every time I tried, it would come back and it would ring at a new time, as if it had its own logic. So now I keep it here in my living room. I don't try to disconnect it anymore. Every day I wait for the ring. Sometimes it's in the morning, sometimes at night. It repeats a private thought, like it's forcing me to hear my own mind coming back at me. I still don't understand what's happening. The phone looks normal. There's no secret compartment. There's no power source. I can't figure out who or what is on the other end. Sometimes I think I hear a slight cough before the whisper, or a small scrape like fingernails against plastic, but I'm not sure. I've considered moving to a new place, but I'm afraid the phone will just follow me, or maybe it'll appear in the new apartment without warning. Right now it's on my coffee table. I can see the dial, the chipped paint on the edges, the old scratched receiver. It's quiet, but I'm anxious because I don't know when it will ring again. I feel my stomach clench whenever I think about it. My mouth goes dry. My breathing turns shallow. Every time I have a random thought, I wonder if that'll be the next thing the phone repeats. It's like I'm trapped in a cycle that I can't break. I'm alone with it, and there's no one else here to witness it. I've tried to live around it, but it's always there, a constant threat of exposure. I don't even talk to people much anymore because I feel like I have a secret I can't explain. My chest feels tight, and my hands get sweaty when I think about that phone. It's been the same routine for weeks. Whenever it rings, I pick it up. I listen to that whisper. I hang up, and I sit there, feeling numb. I can't run from it. I can't destroy it. I can't ignore it. I wish I could say I have a plan or an idea on how to handle it. I don't. I just try to get through each day, hoping it won't ring, but knowing it probably will. When it happens, I feel my pulse racing, and I brace myself for whatever I'm about to hear. It's always a thought I had, something so minor but so intimate, and it never fails to shake me up. I keep telling myself maybe one day it'll stop on its own. Maybe it'll just go silent and stay that way. But so far it hasn't. Every time I hear that dull ring, I know it's back. It won't leave me alone. It's like this old, outdated piece of plastic has found a way into my head. That's the story. That's what's happening. I'm a guy living alone in a small apartment with an antique rotary phone that rings on its own. It doesn't matter if it's plugged in or not. It doesn't matter if I destroy it. It always comes back. And every time it rings, I hear heavy breathing and then a whisper repeating my own private thoughts. I've tried everything, but nothing works. It's still here, sitting a few feet away from me, waiting for the right time to ring. And every time it does, it feels like it's alive. I got home last Monday, tossed my keys on the kitchen table, and took off my shoes without thinking about anything except the shower I wanted to take. Work had been relentless all day. I felt sore, and my shirt clung to my skin because of the heat outside. I went into the bathroom, turned on the water, and waited until the steam started to billow against the shower curtain. That's my usual routine. I step inside, feel the hot water on my back, and let my muscles relax. But that night, when I finished and wiped my face, I saw something on the mirror that stopped me cold. There were faint lines, like half-erased letters, spread across the fogged-up glass. I squinted. I could make out fragments of words I didn't remember writing. My heart pounded, and I leaned in to look closer. Before I could figure them out, I wiped the mirror with my towel. The marks disappeared instantly. I didn't dwell on it too much. I dried off, got dressed, and went to bed. But I couldn't forget the strange sight of those incomplete letters. The next evening, I found myself rushing into the bathroom again. My job demands that I stay late sometimes, so by the time I got home, it was close to 10. I was drained from back-to-back meetings. My shoulders ached, my feet felt heavy. I switched on the shower, closed the door, and waited for the water to heat. Steam quickly covered the mirror. I stripped down and got in. The water pressure hit my skin with a steady pulse. I let out a grunt of relief and tilted my head back. The heat helped me forget everything for a moment. But after a few minutes, I remembered what I had seen on the mirror the night before. My stomach twisted. I glanced at the glass door, half expecting to see shapes forming through the steam. I tried to shake off the feeling and finished showering. I stepped out and stared at the mirror. It was completely fogged up. My body was still dripping, and the room smelled like my usual soap. This time I noticed several odd symbols drawn in the middle of the condensation. They looked like scribbles or shapes I couldn't recognize. Maybe they were letters from another language, or maybe random markings. My breath caught in my throat. My hands felt clammy, even though I was still wet from the shower. I leaned forward, my towel around my waist, and peered at each symbol. They looked deliberate, like someone with a finger had dragged lines across the mirror. I felt a shiver run through my arms. I reached out and wiped the glass. The symbols vanished. I stepped back and stared. My reflection stared back at me, watery and blurred around the edges. I didn't know what to think. I dried off, left the bathroom, and lay in bed with the lights off, going over the possible explanations in my head. I thought maybe I had absent-mindedly done it, but I hadn't. I was sure of that. On Wednesday, the tension got worse. I came home at 7, ate a quick dinner, and went straight to the shower. It felt like a habit I couldn't skip. This time I felt uneasy before I even turned the faucet. My bathroom seemed darker than usual, even though the light overhead was on. I tried to calm myself as I peeled off my clothes. The mirror stood right there, large and ordinary, except I knew something might appear again. The water got hot, and I stepped in. The rush of the spray made me close my eyes. Every minute or so, I glanced at the mirror from behind the shower curtain. Of course, I couldn't see anything but a blurry outline. When I finished, I turned off the water and pushed the curtain aside. My eyes immediately locked onto the mirror. There were 3 distinct words spelled out this time. They looked shaky, like they had been written in a hurry. The words said, "Not yet sure." My heart pounded so hard it felt like it could burst out of my chest. My skin prickled and water dripped onto the floor around my feet. I blinked a few times, hoping I was imagining this. I reached out with my hand and touched one of the letters. The moisture on my fingertips smeared it slightly. It was real. Someone, or something, had traced those letters in the steam. I stood there, my body freezing in the warm bathroom. I didn't want to keep looking at the mirror, but I couldn't look away. Finally, I tore my gaze off those words and grabbed my towel. I scrubbed the mirror clean again, and then I stood there, my arm trembling, feeling lightheaded. I threw on my pajamas and went to bed without brushing my teeth. My mind raced, but I was too scared to think straight. That night, I barely slept. My bedroom felt stuffy. I tossed and turned. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that phrase, "Not yet sure." It made me feel like something was about to happen, like I was waiting for something unknown. My thoughts got jumbled. I tried to tell myself it was just a trick of the mind, maybe some leftover writing I did without remembering, but I knew that was a lie. The strokes were too neat and clear for me to have done them subconsciously. Thursday came, and work was a blur. I snapped at a colleague for asking a simple question. My boss gave me a disapproving glance. By 5 o'clock, my left eye twitched from lack of sleep. I couldn't wait to get home, but I also dreaded stepping into that bathroom again. I thought about skipping my shower, but my body felt grimy from stress. The drive back felt longer than usual. I kept my radio off because I couldn't handle any noise. When I arrived home, I stood in the hallway for a bit, my eyes on the bathroom door. It was partially open. The light was off, but I felt like something was in there, waiting. I shook that thought away, flicked on the light, and stepped inside. The mirror looked normal. I turned on the shower and stepped under the hot water, trying to keep my head clear. My eyes stayed open most of the time, stinging from the soap, because I didn't want to let the mirror out of my sight for too long. After I finished washing up, I turned off the water and stared at the mirror. There was a short phrase again. It said, "Thought you knew." My mouth went dry. I could taste my own anxiety on my tongue. My knees felt wobbly. I pressed a hand against the cold tile wall to keep myself steady. The words didn't move. I whispered to myself, "What the hell is this?" My voice sounded shaky. I reached for my towel, dried myself off, and then brushed my fingers over the words. They faded under my touch. I hurried out of the bathroom, grabbed some clean clothes from my dresser, and sat on the edge of my bed. My head throbbed. I kept picturing those words. Something seemed to be suggesting that there was a truth I should be aware of, but I had no clue what it might be. I had no hidden secrets that big, just normal stuff everyone has. At least that's what I told myself. I couldn't eat much that night. I flipped through the channels on my TV, but nothing stuck in my mind. I kept feeling the urge to go back to the bathroom and check if something else had appeared. I resisted for a while, then gave in. The mirror was still. No new words. I tried to relax, but I couldn't. I crawled into bed, replaying everything. My heart was racing, and I felt like I was on the verge of panic. Friday, I woke up feeling slightly sick. My alarm went off, and I groaned. My reflection in the bedroom mirror looked pale, with dark circles under my eyes. I decided to skip my usual morning shower. I threw on some clothes, splashed water on my face in the kitchen sink, and rushed to work. The day dragged on. My body felt tense. My phone vibrated with messages, but I ignored most of them. I ate lunch alone, not wanting to talk to anyone. By the time evening came, I realized I couldn't avoid my own bathroom forever. I live alone, and that shower is part of my routine. When I got home, I walked straight to the bathroom. I turned on the light and stared at the mirror. It was clean and empty. No messages. I let out a short laugh, but it was forced. I turned on the water and waited. The steam fogged up the mirror again. I felt sweat trickle down my neck, and not just from the heat. I stepped into the shower. The hot water pounded on my shoulders and eased some of my tension. Then I heard a faint squeak. My heart kicked against my ribs. It sounded like a finger dragging across the glass. I couldn't see through the shower curtain because it's not transparent. I felt my stomach twist in knots. I shut off the water and pulled the curtain aside quickly. My body was trembling. I stared at the mirror. This time, there was a longer phrase. "It's almost time." I swallowed hard. My chest felt tight. My breathing was shallow. I stepped toward the mirror, ignoring the water dripping onto the floor. The letters were bigger, more forceful. I touched them, and my fingertip came away with moisture. I felt dizzy. I clenched my hand into a fist and wiped the mirror in a single motion. I glared at my reflection, which looked pale and frightened. Then I stormed out of the bathroom, water still clinging to my body. I pulled on a t-shirt and sweatpants, dropping my towel somewhere along the way. I paced around my living room for a few minutes. My hands shook. My scalp tingled. I felt a need to keep moving, like if I stopped, I would collapse. Eventually, I sat down on my couch. My mind kept flashing back to the phrase, "It's almost time." Time for what? I tried to watch a movie. I paused it midway because my focus was shot. I went to the kitchen for a glass of water, drank it in one gulp, and realized I was sweating. The air conditioning was on, but I felt hot. I checked the thermostat. It showed a normal temperature. My heart was racing. I tried to calm down by lying on the couch and closing my eyes, but every time I drifted off, I saw that message in my mind. After an hour of tossing around, I got up and walked down the hallway. The bathroom door was closed. The overhead light was off. I flipped the switch. The mirror was blank. I exhaled and shut off the light again. I went to bed, but my sleep was restless. Saturday morning, I woke up with a stiff neck. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stared at the floor. My apartment felt suffocating. I opened all the windows. A mild breeze came in. I spent the day cleaning. I vacuumed, washed dishes, did laundry. I kept myself busy so I wouldn't think about what was happening in the bathroom. By 6 that evening, I was sweating and needed a shower. I tried to resist it. I kept telling myself to just skip it, but I felt gross. Eventually, I caved in. I went to the bathroom, bracing myself. I left the door open this time, hoping that maybe it would help. I turned on the water, but didn't let it get too hot. I didn't want as much steam. I took a lukewarm shower, rinsed quickly, and turned off the water. The mirror had only a thin layer of fog. I let out a sigh of relief. But then I noticed something in the corner of the mirror. 4 small words. "You cannot hide." They were written in a slender, angled script. My chest tightened. My breath caught in my throat. I blinked several times. The words didn't vanish. My mind raced. Was there someone in my apartment? How did these messages keep appearing? I wiped the mirror clean again, rubbing so hard my arm got sore. I checked every inch of my apartment that night. I opened closets, looked under furniture, glanced behind doors. There was nobody there. I felt exhausted but too on edge to sleep. My reflection in the living room window looked hollow. I closed the blinds. I paced. My body buzzed with nervous energy. My jaw was clenched so tight that my head hurt. Eventually, I fell asleep on the couch, the TV quietly humming in the background. Sunday arrived, and the unease was worse than before. I kept replaying all the messages, the symbols, the half-phrases, the references to secrets I didn't remember telling anyone. Around noon, I made coffee but barely touched it. My hands were shaking. I left the mug in the sink. I sat on the couch staring at the bathroom door, which I had left open. Sunlight streamed into the living room, but the bathroom looked dark in comparison. I wasn't sure if I could face another message, but I knew I had to shower eventually. By the afternoon, I decided to do it. I felt sweat on my chest and back, just from the anxiety. I walked into the bathroom, turned on the shower, and stood under the water. I noticed goosebumps on my arms, even though the water was warm. I heard the faint squeaking sound again. My stomach lurched. I inhaled sharply and turned off the water. I gripped the edge of the sink, leaning forward. Then I looked up at the mirror. The steam was heavy this time, and there were more words than before. They formed a sentence in uneven, shaky letters. "Your thoughts are known." I gasped. My pulse hammered. Sweat and water ran down my forehead. I felt like I was standing on unstable ground. My thoughts? Which ones? I tried to breathe calmly, but my chest felt tight. The letters slowly started to drip, distorting the sentence into a blur of streaks. I wiped the mirror with my hand, clearing everything away. My reflection stared back at me, my face pale and tense. I couldn't believe this was real, but it was. I felt a dryness in my throat. My voice cracked when I tried to speak out loud. "What do you want from me?" There was no response, just silence and the dripping of the shower head. I left the bathroom, wiped myself down in the hallway, and got dressed in a hurry. I glanced at the clock. It was only 4 in the afternoon, but it felt like midnight. My entire body felt fatigued. I sat at the kitchen table, my leg bouncing uncontrollably. My mind swirled with questions. There was something about these messages hinting that I was going to learn something soon, something I was afraid of. My palms were clammy, and my heart still pounded. I tried to distract myself by doing small tasks. I refilled the soap dispenser in the kitchen. I reorganized some old bills. My eyes flicked toward the hallway every few minutes. Now, I'm sitting here, telling you this. Every night since Monday, these messages have appeared. They're incomplete or cryptic, like they're building up to a final reveal. They talk about secrets I've never shared. They hint at things I barely admit to myself. I've started avoiding my own reflection because the fear hits me every time I see it. My chest tightens and my skin prickles whenever I think about what might show up next. I keep expecting to see something that destroys whatever sense of normalcy I have left. I'm not sure if I can keep doing this. My entire body feels tense whenever I step into the bathroom. The hot water, which used to comfort me, now feels like a trigger for something sinister. I don't have a solid plan. I'm worried that the final message I see on the mirror will expose some truth I don't want to face. Every time I stand there, the steam rises, and I brace myself for another string of words. I wish I could pretend it's not real, but I've seen the messages fade under my own hand. I've smelled the stale scent of the steam. I've heard that squeak of a finger on glass. I don't know what the mirror is trying to tell me. I just know I'm afraid of it. I'm afraid of the moment I read the final words, and I'm afraid of whatever those words might say. That's why I avoid my reflection now. I take shorter showers. I keep the water cooler. I wipe the mirror down as fast as I can and leave the bathroom quickly. But I still feel that creeping sense of dread. I feel it when I'm lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for sleep to take over. My heart races and I taste fear on my tongue. My gut twists at the thought of facing that mirror the next day. I can't escape my own thoughts, and apparently something else can't ignore them either. I'm waiting. I'm trying to act normal, but every breath feels shallow. My body is on high alert. I don't want to see whatever final message will appear. I don't want to know what it will say about me, but I can't stop it from coming. It's there, in the back of my mind, telling me that one day soon I'll step out of the shower, look up at the fogged glass, and see the rest of the message. And at that point, I might finally understand why this is happening. Or maybe I'll wish I never did. For now, all I can do is avoid my own eyes in the mirror and try not to think about what's waiting for me tomorrow night. I got this clock as a gift a few weeks ago, and I knew right away it wasn't just another antique. It had a heavy frame, strange carvings of demonic faces, and a big pendulum that swung in a deliberate rhythm. From the moment I hung it on my living room wall, it dominated the space. I wanted to ignore how odd it looked and sounded, but I couldn't. Now, every night at midnight, it stops. The pendulum freezes in place, and everything goes silent. After a few seconds, it starts up again, and the ticking changes. It's steady but feels deeper and more forceful. I notice the walls vibrating. I notice my own breathing speeding up. I stand there in the dark and try not to panic, but it's impossible to ignore the sense that something is stirring in my house. I live alone in a small single-story home on a quiet street. The front door leads straight into my living room, and the living room connects to a short hallway. At the end of that hallway, there's my bedroom. There's also a modest kitchen and a bathroom that I barely use except for quick showers and basic necessities. I never had any trouble sleeping here before I got that clock. My evenings were always calm. I'd read or watch some TV, then turn off the lights. I never worried about strange noises because there were none. Now I spend my nights listening to every single creak and echo. The clock keeps drawing my attention. Its large face has Roman numerals that are worn out at the edges. The hands are thinner than usual, with little scratches that run along the metal. The demonic faces carved into the wood seem to watch me when I walk by. The day I got it, I remember thinking it might be valuable. A friend gave it to me, saying it was a rare find. I didn't ask many questions. I thanked him, shook his hand, and carried it into my home. I had to clear some space on the wall because the clock was bigger than I expected. When I first hung it, it felt heavy against the plaster. I remember the nails creaking as I pressed the weight into place. Once it was up, I stood back to check if it was level. The demon faces on the sides looked odd, but I figured it was just old craftsmanship. I pulled the pendulum back, let it swing, and I heard a deep tick right away. It wasn't loud at first, but it felt solid. The first night I didn't notice anything unusual, except that the ticking seemed to get louder as the night went on. I fell asleep on the couch and woke up around midnight. The clock's chime caught my attention. It didn't have a typical chime. It was more of a low gong, followed by a faint rattle. My eyes were still half closed, and I couldn't fully register what I was hearing. I tried to get more comfortable, but then I realized the clock had gone silent. The second hand wasn't moving, the pendulum wasn't swinging. I rubbed my eyes and listened to the quiet. My own heartbeat felt loud in my ears. After a few seconds, I heard the ticking start again. It sounded slower. It also sounded heavier, like it had more weight behind it. I felt a chill on my arms. The hair stood up on the back of my neck. I sat up on the couch and tried to shake off the feeling of dread, but I couldn't. I got up, walked over to the clock, and put my hand on it. The wood felt cold. The carvings looked more prominent in the dim light. I leaned in, listening to the pendulum swing. It had a rhythm that seemed to pulse in the air. I felt it in my chest. Then I felt a slight vibration in the floor. It traveled up my legs. I tried to tell myself it was just in my head. I pulled my hand away and went to my bedroom. I shut the door, got into bed, and hoped it was just an odd first impression. The next morning, I woke up feeling uneasy. I tried to forget it and went about my day as usual. I work from home, so I spend a lot of time in my office with the door closed. I didn't pay attention to the clock during the day. Around dinner time, though, I noticed the ticking again. It was steady, but I felt like it was daring me to look at it. I forced myself to ignore it. I sat down on the couch, turned on the TV, and tried to watch a show. But the clock kept pulling my focus. Whenever a quiet moment came on the program, I heard that tick. It wasn't loud, but it was firm. It almost matched my pulse. I got up at one point to see if the demon faces on the wood looked different in the daylight. They still looked the same, but their grimaces felt more intense. They had sharp features and hollow eyes. I didn't stare too long. That night, I stayed up with a book, trying to avoid sleeping near the clock. At midnight, I placed myself in the corner of the living room, where I had a clear view of the entire clock. Just as the clock struck 12, it stopped. The minute hand froze. The pendulum stopped. The entire house felt blanketed in silence. I didn't move. My eyes were locked on the pendulum. About 5 seconds later, it started again with a heavy click. The ticking resumed, but it was different. I felt tension gather in my chest. My limbs felt stiff. I stood up and approached the clock. My foot hit a loose floorboard and it creaked loudly. The pendulum swung in front of me, left to right, left to right, each movement accompanied by that solid tick. My head started to ache. I couldn't sleep that night. I felt on edge and stayed awake until dawn. I paced the hallway a few times, checked the kitchen for a snack, returned to the living room, turned the clock's face light on and off. I kept thinking I heard faint noises in the hallway. They were soft thumps and a kind of low rumble. When I listened carefully, I realized it matched the clock's rhythm. I had this urge to open the front door and get some fresh air, but I was afraid to leave the clock inside by itself. I didn't want to admit that I was spooked, but I was. On the third night, I decided to do something different. I climbed up on a small stepladder and examined the mechanism at the back of the clock. I was looking for any sign of a defect or something that would explain the midnight pause. The gears looked fine. I tried to wind it manually, but it was already fully wound. The pendulum chain was intact, and nothing appeared broken. When I pulled out the pendulum to start it swinging again, it took off with a jolt and I nearly fell off the ladder. My heart pounded in my chest. I got down and stood there, breathing heavily. That same night, I watched the clock from behind the couch. I turned off every light. At midnight, it stopped, same as before. I counted 5 seconds in my head. Then it resumed. I noticed the demon faces on the side of the clock were catching the faint glow of the streetlight outside. Their carved mouths appeared twisted. I felt my stomach tighten. I didn't want to walk over and stare at them. I also didn't want to look away. I ended up staying right there behind the couch until my back ached. Then I made myself go to bed. For the next few days, I tried to ignore the clock. I set my phone alarm to midnight and shut my bedroom door before the clock could stop. When I heard the phone buzz, I counted the seconds while lying in bed. I pictured the clock's pendulum hanging still for 5 seconds, then starting up again. I couldn't help but feel my own heartbeat sync with that ticking. My forehead broke out in sweat. My fingers gripped the edges of the blankets. I felt like the entire house was watching me. By the end of the week, I was restless. My house didn't feel comfortable anymore. The nights seemed longer. The days felt tense, because I was waiting for the next midnight. I tried to talk to my friend about the gift. He claimed he found it at a small estate sale and knew I liked antiques. He sounded casual about it. I asked if he ever noticed anything weird about the clock. He said he never tested it. He just brought it over, wrapped in an old blanket. I didn't bother giving him too many details. I knew it would sound strange. That night I went to bed early, hoping I could sleep through midnight. I tucked myself in, turned off the light, and tried to block out the faint ticking in the living room. I could still hear it through the walls. The more I tried to ignore it, the more I noticed it. I felt the familiar tension in my chest. I closed my eyes and took slow breaths. The harder I tried to relax, the more I focused on that sound. As midnight approached, I felt my pulse quicken. Then I heard absolute silence. No ticking, no movement. It was the same 5-second gap that I had grown used to. My body tensed. Then the clock started again with that heavier sound. It invaded my bedroom. I sat up in bed, my hands shaking. I felt a dull ache behind my eyes. I got up and walked to the living room. The hallway felt colder. The carpet under my feet felt damp, even though I knew it wasn't wet. I flipped on the living room light. The bulb flickered for a moment and then stabilized. The clock's pendulum swung left to right, with a thick, repeated tick. I walked over and put my palm against the wall next to the clock. I felt a faint vibration. Each time the pendulum reached the end of its arc, the vibration grew stronger. My eyes wandered to the demon faces. Their carved eyes had small grooves around them, and the mouths were parted, showing rows of jagged teeth. My breathing got shallow. I clenched my jaw. I took a step back, stared at the clock face, and saw that it read 12:02. 2 minutes past midnight, and I was standing there, heart pounding, worried that something else would happen. By the 7th night, I was exhausted. I hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a time. The clock felt like a living presence in the house. I tried to record it on my phone. I set the phone up on a table, aimed at the clock, and hit record around 11:50 p.m. Then I sat on the couch with the lights off, waiting. At midnight, the clock stopped. The silence filled my ears. My mouth went dry. I tried not to move. 5 seconds later, the pendulum started swinging again. The ticking sounded thick and resonant. My phone captured everything, but I didn't watch the footage until the next morning. When I played it back, I saw the exact moment the clock's hands froze. The camera audio went silent. There was a faint static crackle on the recording, but no actual ticking. Then the pendulum started moving and the ticking resumed, sounding louder than before. It almost overwhelmed the phone's microphone. Nothing else showed up on the video. No shadows, no weird shapes. I still felt uneasy, though. The silence on the recording made my skin crawl. Last night, something new happened. At midnight, I was waiting in my bedroom. I heard the clock stop, then I heard what sounded like a low hum in the hallway. It vibrated my door. I got up, opened the door, and saw the hallway light flicker. The hum grew louder, then vanished when the clock started ticking again. I moved into the living room and the clock looked normal. The pendulum was moving. The face showed 12:01, and the demon carvings were as menacing as ever. I tried to ignore the rush of cold air on my arms. Now I'm on edge all the time. The clock still stops every midnight. It still resumes with that heavy ticking. The vibrations seem stronger than ever. My living room walls feel like they're pulsing in sync with the pendulum. I feel it under my feet when I walk around. My head hurts most of the day. My shoulders feel tense and my stomach feels knotted. I stand by the clock sometimes, just watching it. I put my hand on the demonic faces, but they're just carved wood, even though they look so vivid. The house feels different. The air is thicker. I keep the windows open during the day to let in fresh air, but I can't escape that ticking. I don't see a clear solution. I think about taking the clock off the wall and throwing it out, but I'm not sure if that would solve anything. Part of me wants to destroy it, but I feel like I shouldn't. I wonder if it's just my imagination, or if there's something else going on. I try not to think about it for too long, because it makes me uneasy. All I know is that every midnight it will stop. Then it will start again with that heavy, penetrating beat. I can't sleep and I can't relax. My heart races at the thought of the next midnight. I sit on the couch, lights off, waiting. 5 seconds of silence, then a ticking that reaches into my chest. That's been my reality since I got this clock. I'm not sure how much longer I can take it. I heard that strange laugh again last night when I was leaving the office. It cut through the quiet hallway and made my whole body tense up. I was the only one on the floor, and I knew it. I had checked every room before shutting off the lights. I always do that. But I heard the laugh echo, sharp and too high-pitched to sound normal. I felt goosebumps on my arms, and my ears started ringing a little. I stood there at my office door, holding my breath, listening. When I realized no one else should be around, I thought maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. But something about that laugh felt too real. It sounded like it came from a man, yet it had this pitch that didn't fit. It made me feel uneasy, so I turned on my phone's flashlight and started scanning the corridor. I didn't see anything, so I locked up and left in a hurry. My name is Lucas. I'm 38. And I work as a financial consultant in a cramped office on the 12th floor of an old commercial building. The building has dusty carpets, flickering fluorescent lights, and a faint smell of stale coffee in the hallways. The elevators rattle sometimes, and the stairwell has chipped paint on the walls. I've never liked the atmosphere here, but the rent is cheap, and the location works for my clients. I often stay late to finish paperwork or prepare presentations. Most people leave by 6 or 7. I'm usually here until 9 or 10. I don't mind the quiet. It helps me concentrate. Everything changed about 3 days ago. That night I stayed until almost 10. I was filing some documents and wanted to get them sorted before a morning meeting. Around 9:30, I realized I hadn't eaten dinner. My stomach felt empty and I started packing up. While I was saving my last files on the computer, the overhead lights blinked a few times, but I didn't think much of it. The electricity in this building isn't perfect. Then I heard that laugh for the first time. It was faint at first. I thought it might be a radio from another office, but it continued in these short bursts like someone was laughing at a private joke. I went out into the hallway and looked around. The corridor was empty and the doors were locked. I didn't see any lights on in other offices. The building was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. I got this weird feeling in my gut, like a slight twist. My heart rate picked up. I told myself it was probably a weird echo from somewhere below or above, maybe a maintenance worker. I called out, "Hello?" I paused and listened for an answer. Nothing. The laughter stopped. I felt a tingling in the back of my neck. I checked the elevator area. No one was there. I headed back to my office, grabbed my briefcase, and switched off the lights. Right as I stepped into the hallway again, the lights overhead flickered rapidly. For a second, I saw a shape at the far end. It looked bent over like its arms and legs were twisted. It looked like it was shaking, as if it was either crying or laughing. I froze in place. My breath caught in my throat. Then the light steadied, and the figure was gone. I stood there for a few moments, not sure if I had imagined it. My pulse was racing. I decided to leave without investigating further. I kept glancing over my shoulder as I walked toward the elevator. On the ride down, the elevator jerked a bit, which it sometimes does, but that night it felt worse. I gripped the rail inside the cab and tried to calm down. I told myself I'd just been working too late, and that my eyes were playing tricks on me because I was tired. The next day I felt uneasy, but I pushed the memory aside. Work piled up and I had phone calls to make. By late afternoon, I realized I was going to be there late again. I even caught myself hesitating before turning off my computer. I didn't want to linger, but I also knew if I didn't wrap up my tasks, I'd be behind schedule. I looked out the window and saw the streetlights below. The parking lot looked almost empty, except for a few cars. My coworker from the office next door had left an hour earlier. I was alone again. Around 8:30, I got up to use the restroom down the hall. While walking there, I heard a noise behind me. It sounded like soft footsteps, but they had an uneven rhythm. I turned around fast, but there was no one. The hallway was still and the ceiling lights buzzed. I felt cold sweat forming on my forehead. My eyes started darting around. I felt like something was lurking just out of sight. I stepped into the restroom and closed the door. I looked at myself in the mirror. My face looked pale. My breathing sounded rough. I tried to calm down. I splashed water on my face. I stayed there for a minute, just letting the water drip. Then I heard the laugh again, but it wasn't faint this time. It came through the door loud and sharp. I actually jumped. I almost slipped on the tile because my shoes were a bit wet. My heart pounded. I yanked the door open and peered out. I saw nothing in the hallway. The lights flickered again and my stomach clenched. I felt like I was in danger. I walked quickly back to my office, grabbed my coat, and left. I didn't bother double-checking anything. I rushed to the elevator, kept punching the call button, and avoided looking down the hallway. I got in, hit the button for the ground floor, and rode down. During the ride, the lights in the elevator stayed on, but the panels rattled more than usual. I tapped my foot anxiously, counting the floors as they passed. When I reached the lobby, I nodded at the night guard, who barely looked up. I left the building, got into my car, and drove home. I felt sweaty and restless the whole drive. On the third night, I told myself I would leave by 7 at the latest, but my boss emailed me at 6 with urgent revisions for a presentation. I spent another 2 hours fixing slides and rechecking data. By the time I finished, everyone else was gone. My office phone rang once at around 8:30, but when I picked it up, there was only static. Then I heard a faint laugh on the line, and the call ended. My hands shook when I put the phone down. I felt my chest tighten. I tried to ignore it and continued my work, forcing my eyes to stay on the computer screen. I kept telling myself it was a prank or some glitch in the phone system. but I was sweating again, and every small sound made me jump. When I finally logged off at 9:15, I could barely think straight. I just wanted to get out. I put on my jacket, took a deep breath, and opened the door. The hallway was dim. Some of the lights were on, but they flickered. The building's after-hours lighting system sometimes operates at reduced brightness. My office is at the end of the hallway near the emergency stairs. As soon as I stepped out, I heard that laughter again. It sounded closer this time. It had a raspy quality, and it echoed. I felt a chill run from my shoulders down my back. I clenched my fists. My throat felt dry. I started walking toward the elevators, trying to keep my eyes ahead. After a few steps, I heard a scraping noise behind me, like something being dragged on the carpet. I spun around. There was nothing. The hallway was empty. I kept walking faster this time. I reached the elevator bank. I pressed the call button, watching the numbers above the door. The elevator was on the 4th floor and didn't seem to be moving. I hit the button again and again. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. Behind me, I heard a soft shuffle. I turned around, and for a moment I saw a shape by the far wall. It looked twisted, like its spine bent at an odd angle. It let out a short, high-pitched laugh, then jerked out of sight around the corner. My hands started to shake. I considered running for the stairs, but I also didn't want to walk back down the hallway. The elevator opened with a ding. I jumped inside and pressed the ground floor button. On the way down, the elevator stopped suddenly at the 8th floor. The doors opened partway, then froze. I stared into a dark corridor with only one flickering light near an old soda machine. I didn't see anyone. I reached for the door close button, jabbing it multiple times. Then I heard that laugh again. It sounded like it was right outside the doors, but I couldn't see anything moving. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt my chest tighten so hard it hurt. The doors shut, and the elevator continued its descent. When it reached the lobby, I nearly ran out. The security guard was at his desk. He was scrolling through his phone. He glanced at me, but didn't say anything. I didn't bother explaining. I just walked straight out of the building and got into my car. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept imagining the shape in the hallway. I kept hearing the laugh in my head. My body felt drained. I tried to calm myself with TV, but I couldn't focus. I woke up at least 3 times, sweating, my pulse racing. Each time I checked my phone's clock, trying to reassure myself I was at home. I had nightmares about that laughter echoing from every corner of the office. Tonight, I'm sitting here again, writing up a quick account of what's happening. I have to stay late because I have important paperwork. The building is quiet right now, but I'm on edge. I keep hearing soft tapping sounds in the hallway. Maybe it's the air system or the old pipes. My mouth is dry. My muscles feel stiff. I can't stop glancing at the door. When I look down at my hands, I see how tense they are, with my knuckles showing. I'm thinking about that figure. I'm worried I might see it again when I step out. I'm scared it's going to be closer this time. I just heard a creaking noise from the corridor. It sounded like someone leaning against the wall. The lights in here flickered for a moment, and I felt my stomach churn. The laughter hasn't started yet, but I feel like it's a matter of time. I keep pausing my work to listen for footsteps. My shoulders feel tight. My eyes are dry from staring around the room too much. Every time I think I hear movement, I hold my breath and wait. Then the sound stops. I'm considering telling the night guard, but he might think I'm overreacting. I tried asking him casually before if anyone else reported strange noises. He just shrugged and said he hadn't heard anything. I asked him how many people stay late. He said maybe 4 or 5 on different floors, but they usually leave by 8. I told him that I'd heard weird laughter, and he made a joke about the building's ghost stories. I didn't push it. I didn't want him to think I'm losing it. But I know what I heard. I know what I saw. It's not normal. I've never felt this kind of dread in a place I've worked before. I'm not sleeping well. I keep messing up simple tasks because my mind is stuck on what's happening here at night. I'm scared to check the hallway, but I need to leave soon. My eyes keep drifting to the clock on my desk. It's 9:30. I'm late again. I'm thinking about waiting for someone else to come by, but I doubt anyone will. Most offices are dark now. I'm going to pack up my stuff. My plan is to walk quickly to the elevator, avoid looking anywhere else, and just get out. I'm shaking a bit as I type this. My chest feels heavy. My back is tense. The building is silent, except for the hum of the ventilation system. The door to my office is slightly ajar, and I can see the hallway light flickering. I need to do this. I need to get out and go home. I'll write more about this if I make it out without seeing anything else. My heart's beating fast. I can feel the blood pounding in my head. I'm standing now, gathering my things. My phone is at full battery. I can use the flashlight if the corridor goes dark. The door is right in front of me. I just heard a short laugh, like a quick exhalation of breath, then silence. It's close. I feel my legs trembling. My palms are sweaty. I'm going to open the door the rest of the way. I'll take a look. If I see anything, I'll run to the stairs or the elevator. I don't care which, I just want to leave. I'm stepping out now. The hallway is quiet. The lights are flickering. There's a faint smell of something stale. I'm moving toward the elevator doors on my left. I'm trying not to breathe too loudly. My shoes are making soft squeaks on the carpet. I hear a shuffle behind me. I'm not turning around. I'm pressing the elevator button. I see the numbers light up. It's on the 10th floor. It's coming up. I hear that laugh again. It's to my right. My eyes are tearing up from fear, but I'm staying still. My heart feels like it's going to explode. The elevator arrives. The doors open. I step in, press the button for the ground floor, and the doors close. I'm alone in the elevator. I'm breathing hard, almost panting. The car descends. My phone slips from my hand, but I catch it before it hits the floor. I keep my eyes on the door, waiting for it to open on the ground level. The elevator jerks once at the 7th floor, but keeps going. My body is ready to sprint as soon as I reach the lobby. I'm out now. The lobby is lit by the overhead fluorescent lights. The guard is at his desk, staring at his phone again. He glances at me and I give him a weak nod, then head straight for the exit. Outside, the air is cool, and I take a few deep breaths. My shoulders ache from the tension. I'm walking to my car, looking back at the building's top floors. They're dark. I think I see one light flicker, but it's too far away to be sure. I'm unlocking my car door, throwing my stuff in, and getting in the driver's seat. I'm about to drive home. My hands are shaking and my throat is dry. I plan to call in sick tomorrow or maybe take a few days off. I need a break from this. I don't know what's going on in that building, but I don't want to be there alone again. I can't handle that laugh. I can't handle seeing that shape at the end of the hallway. It's messing with my head. I'm scared every time I hear the slightest noise. I feel like I'm being watched. My entire body is tense and I feel drained. Right now, I'm just sitting in my car, letting the engine idle for a moment. I'm resting my head against the seat. I want to calm down. I might stop at a drive-thru on the way home, maybe get some water or something. Then I'm locking myself in my apartment for the night. I'll figure out what to do about my job later. All I know is that I don't want to be there alone after dark again. That laughter is stuck in my mind, and I can't shake it. I feel it in my bones, like a memory I can't get rid of. I'm leaving now. That's all I can do. I never planned on spending my evenings walking through a dead garden with a flashlight shaking in my hand. But that's exactly what happened after I rented that chalet. I remember the first time I drove onto the property. The house looked fine, but there was a stretch of land behind it that caught my eye right away. It was just dirt, weeds, and tangled vines. Everything looked brown and dry. I heard from some folks in the area that the garden used to be full of colorful plants a long time ago, but nobody touches it now. There are rumors about weird things happening there at night. The owner didn't mention much, just hinted that I should avoid it after dark. I laughed it off at first, but I didn't completely ignore the warning. I've always been curious about strange places. That's why I decided to check it out for myself. though I had no idea what I was in for. I arrived at the chalet in the late afternoon. I unloaded my bags from the trunk and walked around to see what the place looked like. The property had a small fence around the back, and beyond that fence was the garden. It was big. I'm not great at guessing sizes, but I'd say it was about the length of a couple of basketball courts. The soil looked cracked, and there were these broken stone paths crisscrossing through the middle. Old trellises stood at angles, covered in dead vines. It felt quiet, but not in a peaceful way. The quiet felt like it was pressing in on me. The wind blew against my face and carried the smell of dry dirt and something stale. It reminded me of an old basement that never gets fresh air. I took my keys and went into the chalet. Inside, it was cozy enough. There was a living room with an old couch, a small kitchen, and one bedroom with a decent bed. The windows looked out toward the backyard. When I glanced out, I saw the garden. It was right there, looming, even though it was just a patch of dead plants. Something about it made me keep looking at it. I felt a small chill on my neck, but I told myself it was just the breeze from the air conditioner. I set up my things, made a quick dinner, and tried to relax. That first night, I found myself standing at the window staring at that garden. It was around 10 p.m. The moon was up, and the yard was dimly lit. I remember thinking, maybe I should just walk out there for a minute. I'll take a flashlight and see if there's anything interesting. Part of me wanted to prove that the rumors were nonsense. Another part of me felt drawn to it. So I grabbed my flashlight, put on my boots, and stepped outside. The night air felt heavier once I was past the door. I walked slowly across the grass toward the broken gate that led into the garden. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness and showed me the details of the ground. The dirt looked packed and cracked. Weeds stuck out at weird angles. Nothing moved at first. I kept walking, stepping carefully around the old paths. Something in the distance flickered like a small spark. I aimed my flashlight at that spot. I didn't see anything except a clump of dried vines. I told myself it was probably a firefly. I walked closer, my heart picking up speed. Then I heard a faint sound like a low thump. It came from under my feet. I stopped right away. I stood still and listened. The sound went away. I waited. After a few seconds, I heard it again. A dull thump that vibrated through my boots. I felt my chest tighten, and I realized I was holding my breath. I looked around. Everything seemed quiet, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was right there with me. I didn't see any animals or anything else. The air felt stagnant. My flashlight's beam fell on the vines in front of me. That's when I saw a flicker of light along those vines. It was pale and short-lived, like a dying glow. I stepped closer and saw the outline of what looked like a face. It vanished as soon as my light touched it. I felt a surge of adrenaline and my legs tensed up. I had this feeling that I should get out of there. But I also wanted to see it again. Maybe it was just my imagination. I moved the flashlight around more, scanning the vines. Nothing. I stood there for another minute, breathing hard. My mouth was dry. That weird thumping noise under the ground came again, more rhythmical this time. It reminded me of a heartbeat. My own heart was pounding, and I couldn't tell if it was my pulse or something in the soil. I decided I'd had enough for one night. I turned around and walked back to the chalet, trying not to run. Inside, I locked the door and sat on the couch, staring at the floor. My palms were sweaty and my mind was racing. I didn't believe in ghosts or spirits, but I couldn't ignore what I saw. A pale glow, shaped like a face, disappearing into the vines. I got up and looked out the window again. Everything was still out there. I closed the curtains and went to bed, though I barely slept. The next day, the sun was out, and the garden looked normal. Dry, empty, and lifeless. I thought about leaving right then, but I didn't like the idea of running off just because I got spooked. I made some coffee and stood on the small porch. I thought I'd just keep my distance from the garden for the day and clear my head. So I spent the morning in town picking up some groceries, talking to a few locals. Most of them mentioned the garden with nervous looks. One older man said, "That place should stay empty. It's been that way for years." He wouldn't tell me more. I got the sense that they all felt uneasy about it, but nobody wanted to share details. I went back to the chalet around lunchtime. I fixed a sandwich and stared out the window again. I tried to eat, but my stomach felt tight. My eyes kept drifting back to the dead plants. They seemed still, but my memory of the night before kept me on edge. I had this urge to go back out there and figure out what was going on. Maybe there was a scientific explanation. Maybe it was some kind of reflective fungus or insects that glowed. That thought made me feel a little better, but I still felt a knot in my chest. By the time dusk came, I decided I was going back. I wanted to see if I could find any actual source for those lights. I packed a small backpack with extra batteries, water, and my phone just in case. I wore heavier boots and a jacket. The temperature dropped fast after the sunset. I stood on the porch watching the last bit of light fade from the sky. Then I walked toward the garden. I stepped in, and right away I felt like the air was thicker than before. My flashlight picked out the old paths again. I followed a different one this time, a path that curved around a row of broken wooden planters. I heard insects chirping in the distance, but it still felt too quiet. After a few minutes, I saw the first flicker of light. It was near a cluster of vines that had climbed up a trellis. I walked closer, shining the flashlight on it. The pale light went out as soon as the beam touched it. I turned off my flashlight, swallowing hard. My chest felt tight. I waited in the dark. After a moment, I saw the glow return. It formed a faint shape against the vines. It looked like part of a human face again, maybe an eye and a cheekbone. Then it disappeared. I felt my heart hammering. My arms shook a bit, and I could feel sweat forming on my forehead. I turned the flashlight on for a second to see if there was anything physical there. The vines were just vines, twisted and old. No sign of a mirror or a reflective surface. I turned the light off once more, and again the faint glow came back. It moved across the vines like it was crawling. I took a step back, and I felt the ground vibrate under my boot. It was that same steady thumping. It felt more intense this time. My breath got shallow and my ears started ringing a bit from my pulse. I forced myself to stay where I was. I told myself I needed to see what would happen next. A few of those pale lights started to appear in different spots. They floated near the vines, sometimes on the ground, sometimes up along the trellises. They would vanish and then reappear a few feet away. I had trouble keeping track of them all. My body felt hot and shaky at the same time, like I was sweating but also chilly. My thoughts jumped to those rumors about spirits. I didn't believe in that stuff, but I couldn't explain what I was seeing. The lights looked like they were interested in me. They drifted closer, never stable. My flashlight felt useless. Every time I tried to shine it on them, they disappeared. I took a few more steps along the path, pressing forward, even though my instincts told me to turn around. The vibrations in the ground got stronger with each step. My boots felt like they were on top of a large drum. Each thump made my legs tense up. The noise was low and heavy, impossible to ignore. I tried to keep my breathing steady. The lights flickered around me, forming partial faces that vanished the moment I tried to focus on them. My chest felt tight and my throat was dry. I forced myself to keep moving, scanning around in the dark. At one point, I saw a larger mass of vines that had formed a thick wall near the back edge of the garden. The lights seemed to be drawn there. They flickered along the surface, merging into shapes that suggested faces with hollow eyes and open mouths. They never stayed long enough for me to see any detail. I had this strange sense that they wanted me to come closer, like they were hungry for attention. I stepped closer and the ground shook a bit under my feet. I almost lost my balance. I reached out to touch the vines, half expecting my hand to go through them or feel something impossible. But they were just coarse, dried vines. My fingertips felt rough bark and brittle stems. Then I felt a jolt, like a tiny electric shock. I pulled my hand back and saw the lights flicker around that spot. I almost dropped my flashlight. My heart pounded, and I could feel my pulse in my temples. I kept standing there, trying to catch my breath. I'm not sure how long I stayed by that wall of vines. It could have been a couple of minutes or half an hour. I was caught up in the flickering lights and that heavy thumping sound coming from below. My mind raced with thoughts about whether I should run or try something else. A few times I glanced back at the house. It looked far away. The idea of going back inside and shutting the door felt comforting, but I also felt a pull to stay. Eventually, I backed away from the vines, shining my flashlight around to find the path. The lights stayed where they were, flickering like tiny candles in the darkness. I retreated step by step, checking behind me every few seconds. I noticed that when I moved away, the lights didn't follow me. They seemed to hover around that dense cluster of vines. The thumping noise faded as I got closer to the gate. I felt relief flooding through me once I stepped outside the garden fence. The following day, I walked around the edges of the garden in daylight, just to see if there was a patch of softer soil or maybe a well or some underground pipe that could explain the vibrations. I didn't find anything. The ground was dry and hard. I didn't see any signs of water lines or anything mechanical. I stood there for a while, feeling a pit in my stomach. I couldn't ignore the possibility that something unnatural was happening. At least I couldn't explain it with the usual ideas. That evening, I stayed indoors. I locked my doors and kept the lights on. I tried to watch TV, but I couldn't pay attention to any of the shows. My thoughts kept drifting back to the faces in the vines. The more I remembered them, the more I felt this urge to do something about that dead land. Part of me thought about bringing water to the garden or trying to plant something. Another part of me was afraid that disturbing it might make things worse. I had this gut feeling that if I tried to revive the soil, those lights would either react in a strong way or maybe attach themselves to me somehow. My body tensed up at the thought. My temples throbbed. I paced around the living room, looking out the window every few minutes. On my last night there, I took another walk near the fence line with a flashlight. I didn't go inside. I heard the same soft thumps from the ground, though. They were quieter but still present. I saw a few pale glimmers in the distance behind the vines. They formed faint outlines and then disappeared. I felt torn. My mind told me to pack up my things and leave right away, but a part of me couldn't stop thinking about trying to fix the land, as if the garden was begging for help. The thought made my heart race. I imagined turning the soil, watering it, and scattering seeds, not knowing what might happen. Would the lights grow stronger? Would they vanish if the garden became alive again? I had no idea. In the end, I stood there for a long time, gripping the fence. My breath was shallow and my hands were shaking. I kept thinking about those flickering lights and the heavy thumping in the earth. I remember whispering to myself, "Do I stay or go?" My stomach churned. My throat felt tight. I heard the rumble of a distant truck engine from the road and it broke my focus. I turned around and went back inside, leaving the garden behind me for the night. The next morning, I woke up early and started packing. My nerves were shot. My hands trembled as I stuffed clothes into my bags. Every time I looked out the window, I expected to see shapes in broad daylight, but the garden was just barren and lifeless under the sun. No movement, no lights, nothing. I felt drained. I locked up the chalet and walked to my car. As I passed by the fence, I paused for a moment. The soil was silent. The vines were motionless. I got in my car, started the engine, and pulled away. I still wonder if I should have tried to revive that land. Part of me regrets not digging a shovel into the soil or sprinkling water on the roots. Another part of me thinks I made the right call. Those lights, or whatever they were, felt like they were watching every move I made. I don't know if they just wanted attention or if they wanted something else. I'm not sure I would have liked the answer if I stuck around to find out. Even now, I sometimes wake up at night and think I hear that dull thumping in my own floor, like an echo from that garden. I have no proof of anything. All I know is that I felt something there. Something that made my skin crawl and my chest tighten. I can't say for sure whether I ran away or just made a choice to leave. But I haven't gone back, and I'm not sure I ever will. I still remember the exact moment I noticed the red reflection. I was on my rooftop, adjusting the focus on my telescope, looking at the moon in the middle of a clear night. Everything felt normal for a while. Then, without warning, I saw a dull red glow around the moon's edge, like a thin band of colored light. It wasn't on any forecast or astronomical calendar, so I knew something about it was off. I put my eye back to the lens, trying to stabilize my breathing. My heart thumped against my chest. I could tell this wasn't a typical eclipse. It looked too sharp, too bright, and it gave me a sudden jolt of unease. I stood there on my rooftop, my hands shaking a little against the eyepiece. I had a strong flashlight strapped around my forehead, pointing down so I could read my notes if I needed to. But my notes didn't matter anymore. I stopped caring about star charts or usual lunar phases. I focused all my attention on that red glow. At first I thought maybe there was some strange reflection in my telescope's lens. I rotated it and checked the glass. Everything seemed clean and normal. Still, that red glow stayed there. I felt a prickling sensation on my neck, as if the air turned heavier. The night was still silent except for a faint breeze that rustled the clothes on my drying line. I stepped back from my telescope. I looked up with my naked eyes, but I couldn't see the glow without magnification. It was only visible through the scope. I wondered if maybe I was just seeing lens flare. But then I saw that the glow pulsed. It shifted from a dull red to a deeper shade, then went back to a faint band again. I swallowed hard. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. My forehead was sticky with sweat, though the night was cool. I felt a little dizzy. I tried to calm myself by breathing in through my nose and out through my mouth. I glanced around my rooftop to ground myself. The tiles under my feet were solid. My small folding table had a few scattered star maps, and my phone lay face down next to them. I reached for my phone to see if there was any breaking news about an eclipse or some new cosmic event. My phone had no alerts. No messages, no notifications, just the time. It was midnight. I had an unsettling thought. Maybe I was the only person seeing this. That idea made me feel alone and slightly nauseated. I turned my attention back to the telescope, adjusting the focus again. The red glow was still there. This time I noticed something else behind the moon. It was subtle, like a thin shadow that moved from left to right, just beyond the lunar surface. I tried to keep my breath steady, but I couldn't. Each inhale felt shallow and quick. My eyes started to water. I stayed glued to the eyepiece, wanting a better look, but the shape was too vague. I couldn't pin down its form or size. It just felt alive, like it was aware of me. I sensed a pressure in my ears, as if the atmosphere changed. A sharp gust of wind made me recoil. I looked up from the telescope again. The night sky was still, but I felt that gust as if it passed right through my bones. I wrapped my jacket tighter and told myself everything was fine. Then I noticed a dull red glow in the corner of my vision. It was below me, down in my backyard. I leaned over the railing and saw a faint circle of red light hovering near my back fence. It was small, maybe the size of a car tire if I had to guess from that distance. It floated just a bit above the ground and cast a weak glow on the grass. My heart pounded. I didn't move for at least a minute. I forced myself to walk back down the stairs. My legs shook. My hand trembled on the doorknob as I headed outside to get closer to the backyard. I tried to stay quiet, but my slippers scuffed against the concrete path. When I got to the edge of my yard, I didn't see the light at first. I spun around, scanning every corner. Then, after a few seconds, it flickered on again. It was the same circle, red and hovering. It made no sound. I grabbed my phone and tried to take a picture. My phone's camera app froze. It wouldn't respond, and the screen turned black for a moment before restarting itself. I stood there, feeling my pulse throb in my temples. The circle faded after a few seconds. I stood in the backyard, listening to every small noise. The hum of a distant car, the rustling of a stray cat near some trash cans. Nothing else seemed wrong, but the hair on my arm stood on end. There was this undeniable sensation that someone, or something, was watching me from the darkness. I felt my stomach churn. I clutched my phone, waiting for it to reboot. It finally came back on, and I flipped to the camera again. Nothing. The backyard looked completely normal. I turned on the flashlight function, sweeping it across the grass and the fence. No sign of that red light. I went back inside, locking the door behind me. My palms were damp with sweat. I leaned against the wall, breathing hard. I glanced up at the small window in my living room that faced the backyard. It was pitch black outside. I turned off the overhead light to see if the circle of red light would reappear. It didn't. Still, I felt that presence. My gut told me I wasn't alone. My mouth felt dry. I turned the lights on again. The house felt too quiet. I needed some sort of distraction, so I clicked on the TV, flipping through news channels to see if there was a late-night report of some lunar anomaly. Nothing came up. Just the usual news about local incidents, weather, sports. I decided to get back on the rooftop. I wanted to confirm if I was imagining things or if something was really going on. My mind felt jumbled, but I had to keep looking. I climbed the steps to the terrace, carrying my phone and a small portable camera. When I reached the telescope, I aimed it at the moon again. The red band was gone. The moon looked normal. I felt a brief wave of relief, but it vanished the moment I saw a flicker of movement near the moon's edge. It was that same shape, that same dark shift in the blackness. I tried to capture it with my phone camera, but my phone froze again. I tried turning on the portable camera, but the battery icon blinked and died, even though I'd fully charged it earlier. My nerves spiked. I paced around the rooftop, glancing at the sky every few seconds. I felt small and exposed. The wind picked up again, more violent this time, rattling the old antenna near the corner of the roof. The metal clanking made me jump. My chest felt tight. I ran downstairs, feeling my heart hammer with every step. I slammed the door behind me, leaning against it. My breath came in short gasps. I checked the time on my phone again. It was close to 1 a.m. I decided to wait it out in my living room for a bit. I turned off the TV and listened. My mind raced, but I tried to keep my body still. I told myself I needed a plan. The weird part was that I wanted more proof, but I was also scared to look for it. My phone rang once, an unknown number. I answered it, but there was only static. Then the line went dead. I stared at the phone screen, noticing the battery icon drop from 70% to 10% in just a few seconds. I plugged it into the charger. The battery level jumped back to 70% instantly. I yanked the charger out and stared at the phone. The icon still read 70%. My throat felt tight. The entire situation felt surreal, but I tried to keep my mind on what I could see and touch. I walked to the window. Outside, everything was dark except for the faint glow of a street lamp. My backyard looked calm. Then I noticed a flicker of red light near the fence again. It was just a flash, gone in half a second. My body tensed, my legs almost buckled. I rested my hand against the window pane, pressing my forehead to the glass. I wanted to understand what was happening. My skin felt clammy. My breath fogged up the window. I decided to document the events with a notepad. I wrote down the times I saw the red circle, the phone malfunctions, the camera shutting off, and that shape behind the moon. My handwriting was shaky, but I kept going, trying to get every detail onto paper. I wrote down the way I felt physically. Sweaty palms, chills running up my arms, tension in my neck, dryness in my mouth. I wasn't trying to be poetic. I just wanted a clear record, something to ground me. Around 1:30 a.m., I mustered the courage to step outside again. I grabbed a small digital recorder, the kind I sometimes use to log verbal notes during my stargazing sessions. I made sure it had fresh batteries. I walked into the backyard with the recorder in my hand, thumb on the record button. The grass felt cold and damp under my slippers. My breath caught in my throat when I saw the circle of red light again, this time nearer to the center of the yard. It hovered about knee height, spinning slowly. My mouth felt bone dry. I started recording, my voice trembling. I described what I saw, a circle of red light about 2 feet across, hovering silently. I walked closer, maybe 8 steps away, and stopped. The light grew brighter for a moment, then dimmed. I felt a prickling sensation across my skin, like static electricity. The hair on my arm stood straight up. The circle pulsed once and the digital recorder beeped, then stopped recording on its own. The tiny screen went blank. I tapped it, but nothing happened. When I looked up, the circle was gone. I spun in a quick circle, scanning the yard. Nothing. Just the faint scent of damp grass and the cold air against my skin. I pressed the recorder's power button again, and it turned on like nothing had happened. I clicked play and heard my own tense breathing, followed by a crackle of static. Then it cut off. I stood there for a while, not sure what to do. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. I felt too wired to sleep and too scared to keep investigating. I walked back inside, locked the door, and sat on my couch. I rubbed my eyes. I replayed the events in my head. The red band around the moon, the shape moving behind it, the red circle in my backyard, the failing electronics. Everything pointed to something I couldn't explain. I tried to call a friend of mine who's also into astronomy. The call went straight to voicemail. I left a shaky message, something like, "Hey, call me when you get this. Something weird is going on." I knew I sounded frantic, but I didn't care. Around 2 a.m., I decided to head back to the rooftop one more time. I wanted to see if that red band would appear again. I walked slowly up the stairs, clutching the railing. My footfalls echoed on the concrete steps. My heart pounded in my chest and my mouth felt dry. I stepped onto the terrace, flipping on the dim overhead bulb. Everything looked normal. My telescope stood where I'd left it, pointed at the moon's general area. I walked over, took a deep breath, and looked through the eyepiece. At first, the moon appeared normal. Craters, shadows, the usual bright glow. But after a few seconds, I saw that faint red band reappear, flickering around the lunar edge. My spine tingled. I felt like the air around me got thicker. I swallowed, trying not to let panic take over. Then I saw it, the shape again. It wasn't a static object. It moved slowly, almost sliding from one side of the moon to the other. It blocked out small parts of the lunar surface as it moved, confirming it was something solid, or at least something that could cast a shadow. My eyes watered from staring so hard. I felt my pulse accelerate, and my grip on the telescope's handle tightened. I tried adjusting the focus to get a clearer look at whatever it was, but the eyepiece fogged up. I pulled away, wiping it with a clean cloth. When I looked again, the shape had vanished. The red glow pulsed a few more times, then faded away. I stood there, my shoulders stiff, my mind racing. I jotted down the time, 2:07 a.m. I wrote a note. Shape behind moon, moved left to right. Red band flickered. I lingered on the rooftop, scanning the sky with my naked eyes. Stars twinkled, and the moon was bright. Nothing else seemed strange, yet I felt a deep dread. My stomach churned. I went back to the stairs, feeling a chill as if a cold breeze had settled on the terrace. When I got halfway down, I heard a faint sound from somewhere above. It was like a low vibration, a hum I couldn't identify. I paused, holding my breath. The sound lasted maybe 3 seconds, then silence. I bolted the rest of the way down, almost tripping on the last step. My hands trembled so badly I nearly dropped my phone. Back in my living room, I turned on every light in the house. I felt safer in the brightness, though my heart still pounded. The clock read almost 2:30 a.m. I paced around, checking my phone repeatedly, but there were no calls or messages. I tried opening a live stream from a famous observatory. The stream kept buffering. Then it crashed. My phone restarted itself again. I shoved it into my pocket. I decided not to go outside anymore. I closed the blinds and sat in my kitchen, sipping water. My throat felt scratchy. My stomach rumbled from hunger, but I had no appetite. I checked the back door's lock 3 times. My body felt drained, but my mind wouldn't calm down. All I could think about was that pulsing red circle, the flicker behind the moon, and the way my gadgets kept failing. I kept feeling a vague sensation at my back, like I was being watched. Whenever that feeling got too strong, I turned around. expecting to see something or someone. There was nothing. After a few hours, I noticed the first hint of morning light seeping through the edges of the blinds. The night had passed without another sighting, but I didn't feel comforted. My limbs ached and my head hurt. I finally allowed myself to stand by the window, looking out. The backyard was gray with early morning light. The fence, the grass, the old shed, everything appeared normal. I inhaled and exhaled slowly. No red circle, no glow, no movement. I turned off most of the lights. I felt an overwhelming need to sleep, but also a stubborn alertness that made me keep checking the sky. By the time the sun was fully up, my fear had settled into a throbbing worry at the back of my mind. Nothing had changed physically in my yard. I opened the door and stepped outside, letting the cool morning air hit my face. No sign of anything strange. The electronics worked fine again. My phone stayed on. My camera powered up without issues. Even the digital recorder played back the static-laden clip without freezing. I planned to call more people later, maybe even contact someone from the local astronomy club, but I needed rest first. My hands were still shaking a bit. My jaw felt tight from clenching it so much. I stood there, looking at the pale sky, trying to wrap my head around it all. As I write this now, I can still feel the tightness in my chest when I think about that red circle and that shape behind the moon. I know it'll return. I can feel it in the way my phone battery sometimes flickers from full to empty for no reason, or the way the night air seems to shift temperature all of a sudden. Next time, I'll be ready to record every second of it, but I'm not sure if I want to see it again. I'm not sure if I want that feeling, the sense that something cold and watchful is out there, closing in. Yet I can't ignore it. My eyes keep drifting to the sky each night, waiting for that red glow. And each time I see a hint of color near the moon, my heart pounds like it's trying to break out of my chest. I don't know if it'll ever go away or if this is just the beginning. But I do know I can't pretend it never happened. Every time I close my eyes, I see that red light in the darkness, and I feel that silent presence hovering just on the edge of my senses, refusing to leave me alone. I saw the small door on my first day in the house. It was in a corner of the hallway on the ground floor, so low and narrow that I had to crouch to inspect it. Thick nails sealed it shut, and I noticed an old padlock attached to a latch. The previous owner warned me not to touch it. He said it was a damp storage space full of mold, nothing important. I was focused on moving in, so I tried to forget about it at first. That didn't last long. During the first night, I slept in a room near the hallway. I woke up around 2 in the morning because of a faint noise. At first, I thought it was just the house settling. Old floorboards can groan in the middle of the night. But then I heard a quiet tapping. I sat up in bed, listened for a bit, and told myself it was probably a pipe. I got a glass of water, tried to settle back down, and eventually drifted off again. The second night was worse. I heard a slow scratching sound. It came from that hallway. The sensation made my skin crawl. I felt sweat forming on my forehead. I listened more carefully, and I realized it sounded like something was brushing against wood. I walked toward the hallway with my phone light. My heart pounded in my chest. The beam showed the closed, nailed door. I could see a slight vibration in the padlock, like it was being tugged from inside. I froze. My breathing got heavy. After a minute, the rattling stopped. I stood there with my phone trembling in my hand, unsure of what to do. I decided to walk away. I went back to bed, but I couldn't sleep. By the end of the week, those noises turned into a pattern. Every night around the same time, I heard soft knocks, faint scraping, and a low creaking from behind that door. Sometimes I placed my palm against it to feel if anything was moving on the other side. The door felt cold to the touch, and I imagined something pressing back against the wood. I couldn't explain it. I reminded myself the previous owner said it was just a moldy storage space. But if that was true, why nail it shut so securely? And why did I hear those distinct noises? One night, I tried to get some evidence. I used a small camera, placed it in the hallway, and recorded a few hours. The footage only captured a bit of rattling. The image wasn't too clear because the hallway light was weak and the camera was cheap. Still, the padlock moved slightly, and there was a noise I couldn't label as wind or plumbing. I watched that clip over and over. It gave me chills. My shoulders felt tight. My jaw clenched. My mind kept asking questions I had no way to answer. Then the dreams started. They were always the same. I saw myself opening the little door and crawling into a narrow corridor. The walls were damp and dark. My knees scraped against a rough floor. At the end of the corridor, there was a faint light. Thin, bony hands emerged from that light. They beckoned me closer. The moment I reached out, I woke up, chest pounding, mouth dry. This dream came back night after night. I'd wake up gasping. My sheets felt damp with sweat. The dreams left me unsettled. I'd pace around my bedroom, open a window for fresh air, and try to calm my heartbeat. During the day, the house felt normal. I'd make breakfast in the kitchen, open a window in the living room, and set up my furniture. Neighbors stopped by to say hello. They mentioned the house was old, with a lot of history. No one said anything about that door, though. I avoided bringing it up. I didn't want to sound paranoid. But every time I walked through the hallway, I caught myself staring at those nails. I wondered if they were there for a reason beyond simple storage security. I started to notice a strange smell coming from that area. It was a stale odor, not exactly rotten, but unpleasant. I tried spraying air fresheners, but the smell kept returning. Sometimes I thought I heard faint breathing. It could have been my imagination, but it felt too real. Each time it happened, my arms tensed up and I felt an urge to back away. My rational mind told me it was just an old house with poor ventilation. That explanation never erased the tightness in my chest or the sweat on my palms. After another week of insomnia, I decided to call the previous owner for more details. His voice sounded uneasy when I mentioned the door again. He repeated that it was just a moldy storage space. I pushed him a bit, asked why he bothered to seal it so heavily. He said he didn't remember when or why it got nailed shut. His voice shook for a second. He told me to leave it alone and hung up. That made me more suspicious. My gut told me something was off. I felt a strange mixture of anger and curiosity. I wanted answers. That night I stood in front of the door with a flashlight. I tapped the nails with my knuckles. They were old, bent in a few places. The padlock looked rusted. I pulled on it gently. The wood around it squeaked but held firm. I felt a wave of adrenaline rush through my body. My stomach tightened, and I realized I was holding my breath. I told myself I would open it soon. I wanted to see what was inside. The thought made my heart race, but I kept telling myself it was just a small room. The noises got louder as the days passed. The scratching sometimes turned into a harsh scraping sound. At times I heard a dull thump, like a fist hitting the other side. It always happened around 2 in the morning. My eyes stung from lack of sleep, and I walked around in a daze during the day. My coworkers noticed I looked tired. I didn't share any details with them. I felt embarrassed describing some weird sealed door that spooked me every night. One evening I came home from work, and the door's padlock was slightly turned. I swear I left it in a different position. A chill rolled through me, and I checked the door more carefully. The nails were still in place, but the padlock seemed looser. I tested it. It didn't come off, but it rattled more than before. That night I slept with a hammer on the nightstand. Around 2 in the morning, the tapping returned. This time I got out of bed, marched into the hallway, and aimed my flashlight at the door. I didn't see movement, but I heard a distinct squeaking. I yelled out, demanding to know if someone was in there. My voice echoed, and I felt my pulse pounding in my ears. I stood there, hammer gripped in one hand, waiting for a response. Nothing. Just the faint smell of stale air. In the morning, I went to a hardware store and bought a pry bar and a better flashlight. I decided I couldn't live like this anymore. My hands trembled a bit as I placed the tools on the kitchen table. I tried to eat lunch, but I only managed a few bites of a sandwich. My stomach churned. I kept envisioning what could be behind that door. I imagined an empty room with a few broken boxes. I also imagined something else. A hidden passage, or a creature, or a desperate person locked inside. My thoughts ran wild, but I kept telling myself to stay calm. That evening, I waited until around midnight. I turned off every light in the house except for a lamp in the hallway. The corridor looked gloomy. Shadows fell across the walls. I crouched down, set the flashlight on the floor, and got a firm grip on the pry bar. My hands shook. I forced myself to breathe slowly. My palms felt clammy. I touched the padlock one more time, then yanked it sideways with the pry bar. It took more effort than I expected, and my arms strained. With a sharp squeal of metal, the padlock broke off. A jolt ran through me when it finally snapped. The old latch looked bent. I dropped the padlock on the floor. It made a hollow clink. Next, I started prying the nails out. Each nail resisted, but I managed to get a corner of the pry bar under them. My muscles ached, and sweat trickled down my temples. One by one, I pulled them free. The noise was harsh, like nails on a chalkboard. My breathing got heavier. When I removed the last nail, I let out a shaky sigh. The door was still shut. I grabbed the handle, but it wouldn't turn. Something inside felt jammed. I wedged the pry bar into the gap and pushed. The door groaned, then popped open an inch. A rush of stale air blew out. It smelled of damp walls and something sour. I gagged for a second and backed away. I aimed the flashlight into the opening. The beam revealed a narrow space. The walls were covered in moldy spots. There was a short passage leading downward, maybe 4 or 5 feet, ending in a small landing. I didn't see any stairs, just a slight slope. My pulse pounded. My scalp prickled. I knew the only way to explore was to crawl in. I got down on my hands and knees, shining the flashlight ahead. The floor felt cold and uneven. I shuffled forward, the pry bar still in my hand. Inside, the air felt thicker. My nose burned from the smell. The flashlight revealed wet patches on the walls and a few wooden boards leaning against one side. My heart hammered as I moved deeper. I whispered my own name to stay calm, though I didn't know why. Every little sound, like the rustle of my clothes or my breath, made me flinch. The passage twisted slightly to the left. I had to crawl around a corner, scraping my shoulder on damp plaster. My eyes watered from the smell of decay. I wasn't sure what was rotting, but it felt like the stench had been trapped there for ages. I reached the landing. The space opened up a bit, enough for me to sit. I swung the flashlight around. Something glinted in the corner. It looked like an old metal can. A few empty bottles lay scattered on the ground. They looked ancient. My mind raced with questions. Who put them here? Why was this place sealed? Then I heard a scratch behind me. My entire body tensed. I pivoted, shining the flashlight back down the narrow corridor I had just crawled through. Nothing moved. I felt my hand shaking, and I tightened my grip on the pry bar. A moment later, I heard a faint shuffle. It came from deeper within the darkness. My flashlight beam didn't reach the end. I realized there might be more space beyond the corner. My shoulders felt stiff and my heartbeat pounded in my ears. I thought about turning around, but my curiosity won out. I forced myself to move toward the sound. I shuffled along, shining the light carefully. The beam caught some kind of wooden partition. It had cracks and holes, and it looked unstable. I leaned in closer, and I heard another shuffle, then a scraping sound. I tried to peer through a gap, but the angle was awkward. I pushed against the wood to see if it would move. It creaked. A long splinter got stuck in my palm, and I cursed under my breath. I pulled the splinter out, wincing from the sting. My heart wouldn't slow down. I lifted the pry bar again, pressed it against a weak spot in the partition, and applied pressure. The partition started to give. That's when I heard a sharp scraping noise from the other side. It was close, a few inches away. My chest tightened. My face felt hot. I thought something might be on the other side, pressing back. I paused, unsure if I should break it down. Another scrape, then a soft thump. My mind raced with scenarios of what I might encounter if I forced my way through. My arms felt weak and my mouth went dry. The sour stench got worse and I wanted fresh air. In that moment I realized I wasn't ready to see what was behind that partition. My instincts screamed at me to leave. I backed away slowly, my flashlight flickering against the damp walls. I crawled back through the corridor, each movement making me feel more desperate to reach the door. My knees hurt, and my hands scraped on the rough floor. When I emerged into the hallway, I took huge gulps of air. My shirt was damp from sweat, and my muscles ached from tension. I slammed the little door shut behind me, pressing my back against the wall. For a long moment, I just sat there. My heart thudded, and my breathing rasped. I noticed the hallway lamp flickering, but maybe it was just my eyes adjusting. After I calmed down a bit, I grabbed some heavy-duty screws and a drill. I sealed the door shut again, at least for the night. I had no idea if that was enough to keep whatever was in there from messing with me again. I slept in the living room that night, lights on, hammer by my side. My sleep was broken. I woke up at every little noise. In the morning, I checked the door again. It was still sealed and nothing had changed on the outside. My body felt sore, and my mind was still filled with the images of that cramped space. I could still smell that damp, sour odor when I thought about it. I haven't broken down the rest of that partition yet. Part of me wants to know what's hiding in there. Part of me wants to leave it alone for good. But I can't pretend the place is normal anymore. I'm aware of that small door every time I pass the hallway. I notice how the air still feels stale, even with the door sealed. I hear faint creaks at odd hours. The nights never feel calm here. I'm stuck deciding if I should tear everything out and see what I'm dealing with, or pretend it's a part of the house I don't need to explore. Right now, I choose to keep that door closed. The dread is there, though. I can't unhear those scraping sounds. I can't forget what it felt like to be in that cramped passage. I check the door every day to make sure my screws hold. Sometimes I pause in the hallway and listen. I hear an occasional tap from the other side. My throat goes dry when it happens, and I feel my heart race. But I turn away. I don't know if I'll ever work up the nerve to pry that partition open. For now, I live with the knowledge that something is back there, sealed in a hidden corridor that was never meant to be found. And that's where I'll leave it, at least for now.